going.
All right.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Tower Babble podcast. As always, I'm Julian Mush. I'm joined by Daniel D'Souza and Jeremy Kozier.
Hello.
And we're going to be talking about the latest in film and television news. And before we get to that, though, I'll just remind everyone to follow us on Twitter at TowerBabbleCast, Facebook.com/TowerBabbleCast, and head over to our website, TowerBabble.ca. The top stories this week are: there was a really crazy day on Twitter, and I want to talk about this with Jeremy mostly. But there was like the stuff that did happen is relevant, so we'll talk about that. The Matrix 4 gets an official title, and we'll talk about what that is. Spoilers for later, and for the future. And there's a Wakanda show in the works at Disney Plus, so we'll talk about that as well, along with a bunch of other things. And again, before we jump right into all the stories, I will point people to our Patreon, patreon.com/TowerBabbleCast, where every month we do a exclusive film club review, it's like a movie club, basically, as the name.
Exactly a movie.
It's or like a book club, you know what I mean, as the name implies. This month, Dan, what movie are we doing?
This month we're doing Royal Tenenbaums. We're going Wes Anderson style.
Because I've been craving some Wes Anderson.
Apparently, Julian's been craving Wes Anderson. It was his turn to pick, so that's what we're going with.
I want to know. It's my least favorite Wes Anderson movie, and I want to know if that's still true. It's just been so long, and I want to know. So we're gonna follow up on that, and we'll find out. So you can head over to patreon.com/TowerBabbleCast, and for as little as $5 a month, you can get that bonus content, included. So please check that out. Okay, let's get into the stories. This week's gonna be a roundup of just a lot of I think mostly smaller stories. There's a few big ones in there, but we're gonna try to go quantity over quality this week in terms of stuff to talk about. Okay, so let's start with the events of Wednesday, February 10th of the year of our Lord 2021, and the reason this day will go down in infamy is because so many things happened on Twitter, and it was really exciting to be on Twitter again in a good way. So, regardless of what you feel about the social network, it certainly has
Great
its
movie.
issues. Sorry, say that again.
Great movie.
The social, right? That is a great movie. Also, not about the same social network. But I mean, Twitter is a polarizing force at times. It's kind of like third in terms of its popularity as a social network, but also like first in terms of like its influence over the social, the world and politics and stuff. So it sits in a strange place, and it was a kind of crappy place to be for like the last 6 years probably. And it's still not great, but there's the odd, really fun day on Twitter where like stuff is happening. Now, not all the stories and things that happen here are I would consider fun. In fact, the opposite in a lot of ways. But the discourse of these stories kind of rolling out, there's like misinformation happening in terms of like rumors that are flying around at the same time. People are trying to figure out what's real, what's not. It's just like it really felt like you're a part of the zeitgeist again, and again in a more positive way. Okay, so here's what happened. So the day began with Gina Carano getting fired from Disney and The Mandalorian. And I say that it started that way. There's a bunch of things that are kind of happening all at the same time. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this story specifically, just because we reviewed The Mandalorian on the show. We've talked a little bit about Gina Carano, behind the scenes, but mostly in the context of the actual show. This is in the context of everything outside of The Mandalorian. It has nothing to do with The Mandalorian except for the fact that she was let go from her position there. It's been something that was kind of brewing for quite a while, and there has been a vocal group of fans on social media that have been calling for her firing for a very long time. And I guess this post, I think it's a Twitter post that she did, was kind of, the last straw for Disney, and they let her go. Jeremy, what are your initial thoughts on this whole Gina Carano thing, and then also just the day on Twitter itself?
With Gina Carano, I think obviously a lot of people are unhappy with her personal views that tend to be year. And it seems to be like her defense is that she's being censored because of her political views, but it just seems that what she's saying is just, I don't know, just
Too
blatant, like
controversial.
misinformation, just completely off base, wrong analogy, wrong comparison, all that stuff. So, I mean, in terms of her getting fired, that's like, I don't know. I mean, that's a whole different discussion. I guess it's part of it. Like,
Yeah.
what you say, in your own personal life, like, should that affect your job and all that stuff? I mean, I personally don't care too much. I just know that I just didn't care for her in the show anyways.
Right.
So at the end of the day, yeah, all the news. I think right after that was the Pedro Pascal thing, which is kind of closely tied with
Right.
those two because they're
On the same show. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was crazy.
Yeah, so Jeremy's referring to the fact that Pedro Pascal was cast as Joel in the Last of Us series on HBO. And there was earlier in the day, there was rumors flying of Mahershala Ali having been offered the role. That actually still might be true. We don't know if he may have just turned it down. Who knows? But either way, it's Pedro Pascal that lands the role. And the same day that this Gina Carano news is coming out. Yeah, I know we spoke about this a little bit off air about the Gina Carano situation. Again, without kind of laboring it, what are your kind of thoughts on this? I said without laboring it. Yeah.
I hate. I'm not defending any of her views. I don't agree with most of what her opinions, especially when it comes to her opinions in terms of the trans community. I guess
Right.
that was the big one. In terms of this specific tweet that is the straw that broke the camel's back, I think it's completely innocuous. I think it's ridiculous for her to be fired over that specifically. There are pieces of the story that I'm missing, not being on Twitter though. There are pieces of the puzzle that I haven't read, so I'm not familiar with the entire story. It's just when you see, I'm just reading a headline essentially. I'm reading the actual tweet and then reading that she's been fired for as a result of that tweet. It seems a little excessive, but
yeah, it's just kind of what we were talking about before. That it wasn't. I don't think that it was just this one thing.
Of course not. Yeah,
and it was kind of like Disney had given her a lot of leeway. I think. I think they generally tried to, especially after what happened with James Gunn. They pulled the trigger really fast on James Gunn, right? And they let him go from Guardians 3, and then they brought him back. And I think that kind of gave them a sense of caution that maybe we should try to treat this a little differently. How much of a lesson they learned there is unclear, but it seems obvious that they let Gina kind of probably stir the pot more than they would have otherwise let her.
It's such a tough thing because you are in favor of fans, using their wallets to a degree to dictate things, right? So if they don't like the way people are acting, I'm okay. I like the idea of fans voicing their opinion, of course. Just this one, it doesn't seem to be on the same scale as some of the other more offensive,
obviously egregious stuff. Yeah, and this is what, and Jeremy and I actually talked a little bit about this as well.
I think it's pretty up there. I mean, she's comparing the state of Republicans to Holocaust survivors, right? That's just to put that out there and say the same thing is happening.
What the tweet says, though, just to be clear, is that the Nazis were. I'm paraphrasing here now, but part of the Nazi strategy was to turn neighbor against neighbor, and that's entirely true. That's historically accurate. It's not to say,
but the statement's not made in a vacuum, right?
No, but and the statement is accurate in terms of what's happening in the states right now. It's not. It's neighbor against neighbor. It's not saying one versus the other is better, right? Republican versus Democrat. It's saying that right now the average American is being turned against their neighbors. That's what I get out of the tweet. But again, not knowing all the backstory.
Sure, I think the context to this is that she is comparing her plight with the plight of the Jews in World War II, which is a strong comparison. I think people are going to have strong opinions when you make those comparisons.
But you see, this is the problem. You guys are already saying two different things. You're saying that she's comparing her own plight, and Jeremy's saying that it's about the Republican Party and how.
Well, because it all ties together. Because she's identifies herself as a conservative entertainer. Very few of them, and again, this is why it's complicated. No, I don't think that we should always just bow to the pressure of kind of cancel culture, quote unquote, because there is no bottom to to that pit. That if you let it, it will consume all things. But when it makes sense, it makes sense. I think with this one, it makes sense to me just because of there's a kind of a track record of this stuff over a while. And it's not just kind of one thing, and we're kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So I don't know. Everyone's going to come down on this a little bit differently. Ultimately, Disney is within its rights to let her go over this. And again, that's what talking about Jeremy was saying before, like just a general idea of is it okay to hold people accountable for their personal actions in a work setting? I don't know. I think that's still being debated.
Well, no, I think the answer to that is yes, but we're not holding her accountable for actions necessarily. This is controversy. Like the company doesn't want controversy. That's
true.
a very different thing.
She kind of does, like, you know what I mean? Like immediately she's trying to use this to bolster her platform. She's teaming up with Ben Shapiro, a show entitled something on the lines of "They can't cancel us."
Yeah, it's basically around like if they can't cancel us if we don't let them.
And so this is part of the problem, right? This is the precedent that's being set. It feeds into her rhetoric now.
Yeah.
Right? It gives them power because they've been canceled. It actually makes their previously false claims more accurate now.
Yeah, that was my first gut reaction to this, which was that like, oh no, this like plays right into her hand. That being said, like, I don't think you can look at this as being like particularly manipulative on any one side, because she's leaving now the biggest show on television, the most popular. Like it took the place of Game of Thrones in terms of like the discourse in terms of around televisions and viewership and all that. It's huge, right? And she was about to get her own spinoff, and I think it's pretty clear that Disney was like, hey, the show called what the heck is it called? Rangers of the New Republic is coming, and they gave us very few details on it in comparison to all the other shows where they gave us a bunch of details, including people who were attached. They didn't give us anything with that. Yeah. I think they're maybe couching them, they're hedging a little bit, saying, hey, we're not going to reveal what's going to happen in the show yet. We're going to kind of wait and see what happens with Gina, if she can turn things around. I'm speculating here, of course, but it seems like that they maybe gave themselves an out there. That show, they haven't said it's canceled. It might just be more of a it might center on other characters more now. Bill Burr's character, for instance, might reappear in that. And Bill Burr, it was great in The Mandalorian, so I would be okay with that. He was just kind of playing himself, though. If we're being honest, I think about that more. He just being himself.
Yeah, he's a charismatic guy.
Yeah. Anything else you guys want to say about this Gina Carano stuff?
I'd prefer not to.
Okay.
Again, not belabor the point.
Okay. So let's move on. So what else happened that day? So we were talking about Pedro Pascal being cast in The Last of Us. There was rumors earlier in the day of another casting, and that was also confirmed, which was that Bella Ramsey has been cast as Ellie for the same series. Now, if you recall, Bella Ramsey she's an HBO alum. She was on Game of Thrones, and she played, Dan, who did she play on?
Lyanna Mormont.
And was a fan favorite. She was a standout in her kind of maybe very short amount of time that she was on the show, but really charismatic and kind of stole the screen.
Yeah, that's what it really was. She was a child that took control of every scene that she was a part of. So that was incredibly impressive on Game of Thrones. Great casting for Ellie, honestly.
And I think great casting for both. And part of what's interesting about this, again, why this day was fun, is because you got all these threads, these connecting threads. I mean, Gina Carano was also on the same show with Pedro Pascal. Pedro Pascal was on the same show with Bella Ramsey, right? So you've got these kind of these connecting pieces here, and so now you have two Game of Thrones alumni coming together to do The Last of Us on HBO. So also HBO alumni, and I guess I think maybe the consensus from the Twitter community was that they were shocked by the Pedro Pascal news, just because it seems like not necessarily a step back for his career, but like he just seemed like he was maybe too big, or he was kind of on the upswing. That this show was maybe like kind of too small for his kind of new stardom. But it's pretty crazy. Jeremy, what do you think of this casting?
Yeah, I mean, I never even considered him as an option. Just going on how big he is. But it's not to say that HBO and video game adaptations aren't big. Clearly, this is going to be probably the biggest video game adaptation to date, especially with the creators of the original game involved.
Yeah.
So when it was announced, I was in shock. I was obviously extremely happy.
I like the idea that you have to put the phone down, you have to take a second, take a deep breath.
I just think, I just immediately thought, what a great choice, casting wise and on his part to sign on to this show. I just think it's a phenomenal choice. I mean, the emotion he's going to bring to this I just can't wait. I think it's perfect.
Yeah, you mentioned Jeremy when we were playing Call of Duty the other day. By the way, you can watch us play Call of Duty on a semi-regular basis on Twitch. You can follow us on Twitch at Babblecast there as well. But when you're playing Call of Duty, Jeremy, you're saying that Pedro Pascal's agent/manager is knocking it out of the park these days. I mean, obviously Pedro Pascal's involved in the decision making of which roles he wants to take, but he's being offered a lot of these really interesting roles, and even performances like he delivered in Wonder Woman 1984. Not a great movie, but his performance is very charismatic.
He's shown a ton of range since Game of Thrones, and that's when I became aware of him. Obviously, he's been acting previous to that. And I would say though, HBO, it's on the right scale for him. He is a big star, but it's HBO. These shows like Game of Thrones, like Watchmen, Westworld, these are the new big thing, right? Movies aren't as big right now, so Last of Us has every potential to be a huge IP for them.
I think you're absolutely right.
Especially without theaters currently, they could be back in full force by the time this is ready to go, but who knows?
So, Jeremy, is Pedro Pascal the one exception to your actors from Game of Thrones, or outside of Game of Thrones they suck?
I mean, there's a few that are pretty good.
Lead
Headley, the guy with one hand. He was also rumored to be Joel. He would have been good.
Oscar Waldo.
Yeah. So where do you guys? Here, I want to ask you this. So there was a lot of consternation online in a conversation I didn't think that really needed to happen when the Mahershala Ali casting rumor came out about people, belly aching about, not casting these characters to look like the characters that we know them from the game, right? And how much do you guys care about whether or not a real life human being looks like the version of? And this, by the way, applies to things like Uncharted too, where I feel like I've come down on a little bit of that doesn't look right, or again, obviously things like Marky Mark is you're gonna be worried about other reasons too. But where do you guys come down on that? Because I don't think I care. I think it's best for actor for the role generally in this stuff.
Yeah, I think with a character like Joel, his ethnicity isn't really central to the character whatsoever.
That's the most important
thing. It's not a part of the story at all. So in this case, it doesn't matter. For some reason, I feel like it matters a little bit more for Ellie, but that's just because of how I played the game and how I envision her. But realistically, neither their characters, their ethnicity or culture is at all a part of it.
The only thing that I think, the only one that you might get legitimate people complaining, maybe, is that Ellie has a particular sexual orientation, and that there might not be enough representation of that type in Hollywood, and that you'd like to maybe get someone in that role who is a part of the LGBT community. And I don't know. I don't know how old Bella Ramsey is now, but either way, it's it becomes a weird thing anyway. So it's let's just kind of they're probably just not gonna.
Well, yeah, the reality is you're casting somebody underage, so you're not going to talk about their sexuality.
Yeah, it'd be really weird. Again, I don't know how old she is. Obviously, the game touches on this, by the way, in the I think the prequel DLC for the original game, Left Behind, and they obviously touch on it again in the sequel as well, and without spoiling anything. But there might be something there. But from a look perspective, I think it doesn't really matter to me. And you're right, Dan. I think really the only thing that matters is if the ethnicity of the character is central to their character, that's where it becomes important, right? And that's just not true for either of these characters. Jeremy, what do you come down on? How much does a character need to look like their video game counterpart?
Yeah, I'm the same as you guys. I mean, it's nice, but it's not like a necessity, especially if it doesn't matter in terms of the story.
Yeah. Okay, so that basically covers everything. There's one other story that came out around the same time, and I guess is upsetting in a lot of ways. So there's more news about Joss Whedon's behavior, this time not on the set of Justice League, but actually on the set of Buffy and Angel. And I'm trying to Christina Carpenter, and another one of the actresses on the set as well.
Michelle Trachtenberg.
Well, yeah, and then actually there's another one, a third one. They basically all kind of have spoken out against Joss Whedon's behavior on set, and they called it casually cruel, I think is the term that was being thrown around a lot. That he kind of he thinks he thought it was funny when he made people cry, that kind of stuff. He was actually not allowed on the set to be alone with female cast. Like this, I guess, has been known for a while. It's pretty crazy, this kind of stuff. I mean, Sarah Michelle Gellar, obviously the star of the show, she came out, she released a statement saying that she's always happy to be associated with Buffy Summers, but not with the name Joss Whedon. So, this is one of those situations where he's quote unquote being canceled, but this is one where it feels right.
Well, this is one where there's enough mounting evidence against him. Like, there's so many voices that are speaking up now. It's clear that this has been a trend for a while.
Right. So we may not hear from Joss Whedon ever again. And
well, even before all this, though, like through the Justice League investigation, it was determined that he was kind of guilty, and they didn't do like a whole rollout of what was happening. They basically just allowed him to make his own statements about why he was leaving his show or whatever. And it's clear that Warner Brothers is just not going to be working with him again. So, and probably nobody in Hollywood is going to pick him up now with all this extra stuff coming out. And I guess the one person who came out, she kind of started out with backing up kind of Ray Fisher and what he's going on with the whole Justice League stuff. Just kind of put that all together and make it make more sense for some people who think it's kind of just all made up or whatnot.
And so Charisma Carpenter, that was what I was like, that's what I was trying to think, because it was like, there's a name there that's really unique that I couldn't remember. Anyway, this one, like you said, there's been talk around it, rumors around it for a long time. It feels a little bit more close to me because I'm a really big fan of Buffy. I really, really like that show. I think from a cultural standpoint, it's a very important show. It was really ahead of its time in the television space. When for a long time, I was a really big fan of Joss Whedon. I really liked the stuff he did. Yeah. They're kind of, it makes shows like Dollhouse seem questionable now in retrospect. But he seemed like he was championing female leads in these shows, and that's still true. But there's just so much more toxicity there that it kind of undoes the good in some ways. But those shows are still, there's other people that worked on them. There's other parts of it. It's not just his work. So I don't think it's one of those things where Buffy's going to get thrown out with him. Buffy's a big name. It still is now. I wouldn't even be surprised if we saw more Buffy. I know there was rumors for a while of a Buffy reboot coming. Joss Whedon's obviously going to be kept a million miles away from that.
Definitely.
But yeah, I mean, it's just another example of poor decision making in Hollywood. So anyway, that was the crazy day on Twitter, and like I said, some good stuff, some less than good stuff. But that all happened within like 12 hours. And it just, there was something to be said about being like a part of these like unfolding stories and kind of people's takes and stuff. It's fun. That's all. That's all I'm gonna leave it there. Again, not everything on this is fun, but the like 50-50 stuff. Yeah, right. Not great. So speaking of not fun, Christopher Plummer has passed away at the age of 91. Christopher Plummer, amazing Canadian actor. Who I don't know if everyone is probably super familiar with him. He has a couple of standout roles, but largely was a stage and kind of character actor in Hollywood. And most recently, he was Harlan Thrombey in Knives Out, and a brilliant role in that. He was in Sound of Music, I believe, as well. And he's going to be missed. I think he was just an icon in terms of a good person. He took over for Kevin Spacey in that what the heck is that crazy, that weird movie. He basically had to like fill in. He had like a week to like replace all of his parts. About that rich guy, I don't remember what it was. Anyway, the one note that I saw that I thought was particularly poignant, if a little bit of dark humor, was that once again Christopher Plummer steps in to fill the role that Spacey should have taken, which is obviously very dark, very dark. But
it's pretty funny.
Yeah, but pretty funny. It just sucks. I mean, Jeremy, do you have any? And I mean, I think Knives Out is probably your most recent.
Yeah, no, just obviously a complete legend of cinema. I mean, goes back a very long time. So
one of the greats.
Yeah, it's just one of those kind of like end of an era kind of situations. It sucks. Okay, so there's been a couple trailers. Fast 9. I don't know how to. You know, it's really hard to transition. I don't know how you do it. I mean, you just got to move on. So
Fast 9.
Fast 9. It just seems like it's the worst one. I get, like of all the.
It's like the complete opposite.
Yeah, right. Moving from traditional classical actor to Fast 9, where they now use giant magnets. Apparently, there was a Super Bowl trailer. I made Daniel watch it. What do you guys think? This is a movie that was one of the first to move out of and move its release date when COVID came around. May have to again, but we're so close to the end of this trilogy, and I'm kind of looking forward to it. You know, I don't know how you guys feel about that. And a trilogy, series. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I think I tapped out a movie or two ago. I think the last one was with the Paul Walker farewell. Like that one was huge, right? And I thought they did a pretty good job paying respects, incorporating it into the story, utilizing his brother to finish some scenes, and with the whole Taggart family and all that stuff. I just felt like it was kind of time. Maybe they're doing one more because it was already pre-planned. But yeah, now it's basically just like an amusement park ride. And it just seems so detached from where it came. Like even with this trailer right there, they're in the backyard, the same location, they're having their barbecue. It just seems just extremely far-fetched that they're able to live like semi-normal lives, but then
crazy lives.
Cars later on. So
it's so funny because you noticed that too. Because I was like, the first thing, they're always having dinner outside, like constant. Like that's like the thing that they do. Is like those movies.
Well, it all stems from the first movie,
dinners.
right? It all stems from the first movie, and the barbecue they had in LA with the the city in the background.
You can have any beer as long as it's Corona.
Yeah. But like I think they're entertaining. Like they're obviously entertaining. It's just and it's not. The point isn't to be super realistic and cohesive and all that stuff. But I just like those original ones, and this is just so far removed from me. So I just don't really care.
I mean, the series was basically reset with Fast 5. Or is it? I'm trying to think which one. Which one was that?
The one before that, I'm curious.
Right. And that basically just changed the whole game. It went from car movies to superhero movies, essentially. And it just gets crazier and crazier. And the running joke is that they just get crazier and crazier. And really, I think they're in on it now.
For sure.
So, it's like, we always joke, like, the only logical conclusion to this is that they do Fast and Furious cars is the next.
I guarantee they will, yes.
Yeah. So, and it's like, the cast is so good. Like, everyone except there's only one character that I like Ludacris's character. I don't like who's the what's his name? He's always just complaining all the time. Tyrese. Yeah, he just always going like, what? What's going on? Like it's crazy. But like I really enjoy the cast otherwise. And they just seem to get like crazier and crazier villains all the time. Filling in villains become friends become enemies.
Turns out he had a brother the whole time.
Yeah, that's the great. Anytime you can go.
I'm surprised they made it into 9 movies before, brother.
Right, I guess so. I mean, I don't know. Did anyone ever see the Hobbs and Shaw spinoff? Okay.
No.
Kind of want to though. Like it's like you said, Jeremy. These are purely just entertaining movies. They're just popcorn flicks.
Right.
You don't watch it with a critical lens. You just go in and watch it for an action.
Not at all.
So.
Remember that one? Speaking of not watching with a critical lens, remember that scene on the runway? This is from a couple movies back, where the plane is taking off and they're chasing with a car. And it's like someone did the calculation, and it's like the runway would have to be like 11 kilometers long or something like that. It was so fun. Like we all left the theater like, man, that was so fun. But thinking that exact same thing. Like, how long was that runway? They just don't care, and that's totally fine. There's also really funny examples of like people be getting caught, quote unquote, by cars, like as if that was a way to like soften a landing, which never makes sense. movies. I think they know that they can only go so far with these. I think before you kind of lose the audience. So we'll see. Fast 9, I think, is the first of the last two. There'll be 11th movie. I feel like this might be like the final trilogy, quote unquote. I don't know, but
I think these movies.
Yeah, I think it's gonna eventually. I think it's gonna keep going. There might be a break, but when they do come back, they just won't have Vin Diesel or the Toretto's, kind of all that
they'll
stuff.
bring back the character from Tokyo Drift, the main guy.
Well, he's already been brought back.
Well, like no. I mean, yeah. Wait, who? When? Not Aaron Taylor Johnson. What's his name?
No,
He's
the
like
guy from
the
Friday
quarterback
Night
from
Lights. They brought him back
Fast
already.
Or Friday Night.
Did they?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
They
Well, I
brought-
missed that.
They brought back Han, who was
Yeah,
murdered.
that's a good point. But hey, justice for you can now put to bed the justice for Han hashtag, because that was crazy that they just teamed up with the guy who killed their best friend. Like that was just like callously murdered them. Like it wasn't like it was like, oops, I accidentally murdered Han. It was like, no, I murdered him out of revenge.
Desperate times, they were getting chased by a submarine.
But other friends. That's anyway. So we can put that to bed. There's also a Falcon and Winter Soldier Super Bowl ad. This is it just looks like pure MCU, like unadulterated, like hook it to my veins type action stuff, and I'm here for it. I'll just let you guys know I am 100% behind what they're doing with that show and everything that they've shown so far. Baron Zemo's got his funky balaclava.
Yeah. I mean, the trailer itself, it didn't reveal much. I don't think we were expecting it to reveal too much, but it was all that crazy action. It looks exactly like the Winter Soldier movie or Civil War.
Right.
So
Both
awesome.
were
Love it.
good.
Yeah.
Jeremy, what did you think?
Yeah, it just was just a showcase on what to expect, which is top-notch action. So it was cool, but it didn't do too much to really I gotta tune in. But I know that when you do, you're gonna you'll be satisfied. So
yeah, it's tough with WandaVision being where it is right now and all the ramifications that's going to have for the larger MCU.
Right.
This doesn't seem, just based on the trailer, to have those same large-scale ramifications.
I don't know. Our last episode, we were talking about how Chris Evans might be on his way back.
I guarantee the show itself will have an impact, but the trailer itself didn't reveal much of that, so it's hard to get as excited.
Yeah, and it's hard to what are you speculating about? Because when we were WandaVision, we've been speculating about what that show's going to be, and I think we've been pretty close about what that show was. We'll talk about where WandaVision is. I think, Jeremy, you caught up?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so we'll talk about that at the end of the show. Can't talk about those spoilers.
Yeah.
So we'll wait till then, and people can tune out as they please. And then there's I made Dana watch this as also. There's also a trailer for the Mighty Ducks Game Changers, which is like a sequel, reboot, requel, whatever you call them, for the Mighty Ducks franchise, coming to Disney Plus. Brings back Emilio Estevez as we all know him, Gordon Bombay. Now, and he's once again coaching the underdogs. But guess what, guys? Now it's the Mighty Ducks who are the bad guys, or the bullies, or whatever. So, Dan, what did you make of this? Did you have an attachment to the show? That's the first thing. Did you have an attachment to Mighty Ducks?
I enjoyed the movies when I was a kid. I'm glad they made it. I hope kids like it. I'm never gonna watch it.
Fair enough. Jeremy?
Yeah, no, I think it's exciting. I like those movies when I was young. So, and there's not really many hockey, anything out there. So,
not really. I mean, from a sports perspective, there's just hockey is not touched on very much. Those are like the biggest movies. That and like
when it is, it's usually Canadian, like Goon or whatever.
Goon, yeah. Jay, what's his name?
Baruchel.
Those movies are good, by the way. And I think of other movies. I guess there's the one with the USA Russia Miracle on Ice. There's that. That's traditionally a classical hockey movie, but there's just not a lot. I'm all for this. This is very Cobra Kai in feeling, and you know how I feel about that. And I just want to see what they're doing here. There's going to be a little bit of cliche. I think that's fine. It's interesting, Jeremy. You bring up like the Canadian stuff. I don't know how much of Letterkenny you've seen, but it looks like the coaches for the new Mighty Ducks are the hockey dudes from the Letterkenny.
That's fun.
Which is a nice touch. It looks like, and it seems like they're paying attention to what is popular in terms of the hockey culture right now and stuff like that. So we'll see. We'll be interested. I think it's think it'll just be fun. And it's actually coming out way sooner than we think. I think it's in March or April that's dropping. So, okay, let's move on. Marvel still has no plans to release Black Widow on Disney Plus, remaining firm on their commitment to a theatrical release. What do you guys think of this? Do you think they should just kind of just buckle in and just give us this freaking movie already?
Well, if they hold out a little bit longer, they may be able to release this year.
Right.
Like there's a solid chance that it does release in 2021 in the theaters. So I think at this point they've waited this long. It's probably in their best interest to keep waiting.
Well, I think what's interesting about this is like you got to consider that there's story implications for the MCU, right? So part of it is a prequel, I think, right? Because spoilers for the MCU, she's anyway. But it's rare. I don't think we haven't done a lot of prequels or like gone back in time in the MCU where those movies didn't have implications on the current timeline of the MCU. So I'm wondering if this might be one of those rare occasions where it doesn't matter. They can just like, yeah, WandaVision, you put that out, it doesn't matter. Falcon and Winter Soldier, that can come out, it doesn't matter. And the first movie back is this. We've had a trailer for like a full year and a bit now, I think. That like maybe it doesn't matter, but I mean maybe like they can't wait that much longer. That if anything after those two properties, then they start getting into funky weirdness in terms of time, like story stuff. I don't know, but it sure feels like I would like to see a full Disney movie sooner than later.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Jerry, what do you think?
I mean, they waited this long, so I've kind of forgotten about it. So if they really want to hold off, then go for it. But
right, fair enough. Okay, so the director of Godzilla vs. Kong, Adam Wingard, is set to direct a remake. Again, this is one of those situations we don't really know the full details, but remake, sequel, requel, reboot of the Nicolas Cage and John Travolta cult hit Face Off. Now, I've never seen Face Off. Have you guys seen it?
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is it deserving of the cult hit status?
Yes.
I was pretty young, but I feel like I liked it. I feel like I remember thinking it's one of the Nick Cage movies that I do like.
Okay.
They're few and far between.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a super fun movie.
What is the premise? Do they change?
They switch faces.
They switch faces.
That's
Okay.
exactly what it sounds like. They take people's
And
faces off.
And there's a really funny scene where Nick Cage like does his Nick Cage acting and like
really?
He like jokes about like taking a face off. And it's like this super over the top, like wide-eyed Nicolas Cage. Like you probably find it like it's a gif.
That's funny. So they're not facing off.
Well, they are technically.
Are they facing off?
Too. Like they're against one another.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. I wasn't sure if they were like buddies. I've never seen it. I have no idea. So, in your guys' opinion, having seen the movie, I guess, having seen Face Off, is this a movie that's ripe for a sequel, ripe for a reboot? And if so, do you have to bring back John Travolta and Nick Cage in some fashion?
Definitely don't have to bring those guys back.
You definitely don't, or definitely do?
You don't.
Okay. Are you sure? Come on.
No.
I think we can get away without them. It's like, to answer your question, it's like I never expected another Face-Off movie ever in my life. So it's like, yeah, cool. But to me, it's the same as like they remake The Lion King. Cool, I already seen the movie. Like I'll be maybe in the theater for that. Who knows?
Sure. Okay. It depends on who they get. The young, sexy actors they get. Right.
It's very important.
You gotta get Pedro Pascal and
Timothy Chalamet.
Timothy Chalamet. Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. Yeah. Or no, it's Tom Holland, Timothy Chalamet. That's the go-to pairing you need. Or if you want to be like
Robert Pattinson.
Actually, you know what? Someone did mention Robert Pattinson as a fun choice for that. That'd be fun. Okay. The sequel to the last movie a lot of people saw in theaters, Sonic the Hedgehog, which is pretty funny, has an official title. And guys, wait for it. It's Sonic the Hedgehog 2 is the name for the second movie. On the bright side, it's expected to feature Knuckles, I don't know how to say this word, Echidna?
No, it's Tails.
Echidna.
Well, no, Tails was already in the last one, so Knuckles is expected to appear in the second.
Yeah, but the little teaser trailer
has the little
it,
two tails.
shows the tails and the yellow, and that's it. It doesn't say anything about Knuckles.
Well, because Knuckles is supposed to be a surprise. I'm sorry. I don't know. They leaked that Knuckles is likely to make an appearance. It's not surprising. Tails coming in is cool. Miles per hour. Yeah. Miles per hour. Guys, anyway. So if you haven't seen this movie, I know I talked about it recently. If you haven't seen Sonic the Hedgehog, it's worth a watch. It's very fun. It's just one of those pure entertainment movies we were talking about before, Dan. Turn your brain off and just enjoy a very funny take on a character that you had an attachment to from the 90s. That's all it's asking from you.
It doesn't necessarily mean that all these movies are interchangeable, right?
I mean, maybe. I'm just saying, if you're willing to turn your brain off for Fast and Furious, I'm saying Sonic the Hedgehog is worth your time.
It's different parts of the brain that you have to turn off, so
right.
I don't think I can.
Okay. We can help with that. Maybe you can stick one of those things up your nose. Okay. And we're going through this as quickly as we can to the more fun stuff. So speaking of sequels getting official titles, The Matrix 4 has an official title, and this one much more interesting. It's called The Matrix Resurrections. Now, this is something that people kind of were guessing at, just because all the sequels had R-based subtitles.
Reloaded, Revolutions, Resurrections.
Right.
Like Rebirth could have been in there too.
So what do you make of this, Dan? What do you think this means for the movie?
Honestly, the Resurrection is kind of cool because there's a few different ways you could go with it, right? It could be that the machines are resurrecting a new form of the Matrix, right? Even where the third movie ends.
Right.
It could be new, like Neo's coming back, essentially, like Neo's resurrected. Like there's a million, or Agent Smith's resurrected. You know, like there's a million different ways you can go with it.
It's interesting,
but it means it's obviously a requel, right? It's a restart, a reboot. That word
I mean, I think the term resurrection is interesting too, because I think Neo has always been used as a bit of a Christ figure, in the past, right? Famously resurrected, Jesus Christ was. So maybe his most defining characteristic was that he was resurrected. So I think, I don't know if that's probably not an accident. It's so fast. This movie's so fascinating to me because it feels like the biggest sequel that people should be talking about, but no one's talking about it, and it's being made by the same people.
Yep.
And it's bringing back. It has a crazy cast, right? And it's literally a sequel to one of the biggest movie franchises of all time, and it's been dormant for so long, and no one's talking about it.
What's interesting is that it's like, why now? There had to be a reason. I'm hoping that this new Matrix takes into consideration some of the new technology that we have. Like, think about AI, neural networks,
right?
Like deep mind. This kind of stuff is way beyond me. I don't understand it, but it's very applicable to the Matrix and what they're talking about. So I hope they touch on that kind of stuff.
I don't. That's really tough. I don't know, because as those movies progressed, it became less about the technology and more about the kind of symbolism.
But it's about humanity merging with technology, and that concept looks very different now than it did in the 90s.
That's true.
Or in the 2000s, whenever.
Yeah, I think the first one was 2001. I think
around there. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, Jeremy, what do you think? What do you think of this? First of all, what do you think of Matrix 4, and then what do you think of this subtitle?
I mean, we've talked about Matrix 4. We already knew about this, so the only thing new here is just the title.
Right.
To be expected. I mean, I don't think they're going to choose a different letter.
I guess you could have. I feel like this is like one of those clean breaks where you could have gone completely to a different place. I mean, you're gonna make a fourth movie after a trilogy. That's kind of like the natural conclusion. A lot of there's no Godfather Part 4, right? Imagine if there was, people would be first of all, that would be fucking crazy, and I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a Godfather Part 4.
Well, I mean, but given this list, they're remaking everything, so why not?
Yeah, but I mean, you're right. It fits. Might as well keep it in the family.
Well, it's also unclear. It's not like this is starting a new trilogy necessarily. It may be, but it could also be just a one-off fourth movie. Hard to say, right?
Well, I don't. You think so? I don't think so. I don't think you name a one-off resurrections without.
I'm sure that the production studios want a trilogy out of this. I would hope that the writers or the creators go into it though without that intent.
Sure.
But
and we have Rhinomite on tuning in on Periscope. Ask what the podcast is about. We're talking about the latest in film and television news. You just missed us talking about Sonic the Hedgehog 2, and now we're talking about The Matrix 4. So, and actually, we're moving on. So we're going to the buzz around Zack Snyder's Justice League continues to ramp up as we approach the release in March 18th, if I'm not mistaken. And with it comes new images of Jared Leto's Joker, as well as other things. There's a trailer coming in a few days. Is it Monday or Sunday, Jeremy?
It's tomorrow.
It's tomorrow. Okay, so it'll be out by the time we release this podcast, which is unfortunate timing, but it is what it is. I don't know how much new stuff it's going to reveal. We got a teaser for the trailer, which is always feels stupid to me that we need to do trailers for trailers, because where does that end?
Well, I'll tell you. I remember Ant-Man, because it's Ant-Man, had a 5-second teaser for a trailer.
Right.
That's the logical conclusion of all this stuff.
Yeah, that's fucking stupid. Anyway, we got photos in not surprisingly black and white of Jared Leto's Joker. There's lots of different takes on it, but Jeremy, we'll go to you as our resident Zack Snyder expert. What do you make of these photos? And give us the reason why it's important. Now, you told me this on our stream the other day, but let us know.
Yeah, I mean, a while ago we knew Jared Leto's Joker was going to appear, which to me is exciting. We had the first teaser image was a blurry image of just, I think it was focused on the Joker card. You can kind of see him in the background, and then I guess Zack Snyder did a Vanity Fair article where they got 2 photos of Jared Leto's Joker, and it's pretty cool. I mean, he's got longer hair, there's no tattoos. We also explained that it's in the Nightmare timeline, which is really cool, and that Zack really wanted to have a scene with Ben Affleck's Batman and Jared Leto's Joker, because he felt like the fans kind of deserve that for this movie universe. And it kind of never. We were already kind of accepted that it wasn't going to happen, with all this stuff happening before. But I just think it's pretty cool that they get to share some screen time together, and that it's in the Nightmare timeline, which is just a super fascinating part of this series. So super excited for it.
I guess it's because it's in the Nightmare timeline, you can just do whatever you want. In terms of just any look you want, whatever, right?
Yeah, so he described it as
a
road weary Joker, and he has 2 looks actually. There's another look where I guess he has this vest with police badges adorned all over it. I guess it's his protection, but also he's killed all these people, and it's badges. So we haven't seen that look. We'll see that in the movie.
Don't need those thinking badges.
What?
Sorry. I think I made a quote from Scarface about badges. You kept saying badges, and I couldn't not say it. I had to say it anyway. The look is, I think, an improvement over the Suicide Squad look, in my opinion. It's hard to say. It's going to be very short, and ultimately, it's kind of inconsequential because it's not quote unquote reality. It's hard. It's a possible future, but I think the most interesting part, Jeremy, you mentioned was that it was basically Zack Snyder just saying the fans deserve an interaction between Ben Affleck's Batman and Jared Leto's Batman or Joker. Sorry. So just for that, I feel okay, that's cool. It's ultimately going to be very short. We know that there's only so much. There's less than a minute of new footage in the movie, quote unquote, freshly shot. This is of that stuff, so it's going to be very short, probably. But
yeah,
so we'll see what the actual results are.
Yeah, the rumor is that in this timeline, Batman's going to be seeking out Joker, maybe for some advice or whatever, because he's obviously trying to defeat Darkseid. But apparently, it's just in the article he says that it's the Joker kind of analyzing Batman, this reflective type thing within the Nightmare. So I'm just super curious and to see how that plays
There's also footage of it looks like the Bat Tank. Was
Yeah, so we got
released.
teasers there. Zach is just doing like a kind of a 3-day countdown to the ultimate 2.5-minute trailer. That will really be the definitive, like, this is what this movie is supposed to be. Forget about the first trailer that he made, like that Come Together song a while ago, and obviously what the movie turned out to be. But throughout these 18-second teasers, we've gotten a glimpse of, today was the back tank, which was never teased before.
Right. Inspired
and
from the
everyone's
Dark
making
Knight, I
comparison
guess.
pictures. Yeah, everyone's comparing those two vehicles there. So that's, I had no idea about that, so that's pretty cool. We also got a really cool glimpse yesterday of Superman in the black suit shooting some laser eyes.
Looking always real angry.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, looking very not happy. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I get it. It's hard to. I don't want to speculate on teasers for teasers, and for a movie that we know a lot about. Ultimately, at this point, it's like, let's just see the movie here. We do. We know quite a bit. We know quite a bit. I mean, we've been talking about it for a long time. We've been getting little bits and pieces. I mean, Zack Snyder knows better than anyone how to like drip feed information about his movies, for better or for worse. So, is there anything else about Snyder's Justice League that we haven't touched on that we should be touching on here, Jeremy?
No, I mean, like I said, tomorrow's going to really either change people's minds or show them what to expect if you think you do know everything. Again, 4 hours, rated R.
Right.
Plenty more surprises up the sleeve. It's going to include, just a crazy list of DC characters. So really, it's going to be pretty epic, I think. So
Okay.
I just can't wait for that March 18th.
It is obviously, like, for me, the next big release. I mean, between that and Mighty Ducks, it's hard to say, but just kidding. We're just very close, so I'm excited to finally be able to just like break it down and kind of move on a little bit. And maybe not. We might just start a conversation about release Justice League 2 might be the next thing. Who knows? But we can at least get this very long story behind us very soon. Okay. Jamie Lee Curtis will join Kevin Hart and Cate Blanchett in the feature adaptation of the Borderlands video game. And it's being directed by Eli Roth and written by the Chernobyl creator Craig Mazin. Craig Mazin has apparently found his niche now after Chernobyl, which is video game adaptations. And following Chernobyl, because Chernobyl is obviously not a video game adaptation, but he was also attached to the Last of Us series as well. So I have no attachment to the Borderlands franchise in video games, but I can tell you that this cast is very interesting, and the director is very interesting, and it looks like it has the right mix to be one of the all-time good to great video game adaptations. Not a high bar to cross to reach, but it's interesting. We're getting a bunch of these coming out around the same time. We've got Uncharted coming. We got this. Previously to that, I mean, think of things like Assassin's Creed, complete bomb, apparently really bad. Sonic the Hedgehog, though, really good. So I think we're maybe coming out. I think we're coming into this kind of the right era now where we can start seeing good video game adaptations.
I hope so. I mean, I'd love to live in a world where some of the video games that we know and love can be adapted into a film that's actually worthwhile.
Right.
Historically, it's very rarely been the case.
Right. Well, you just saw Monster Hunter is another great example. Resident Evil.
Yeah. Well, look. I mean, that is, you're right. It's an all-star cast, director and writer as well. They're obviously investing in it, so it's an incredibly popular game series. I don't know enough about it, but
I've only played a little bit of Borderlands 2 on my PS Vita, and it's post-apocalyptic esque. It's got a funny bend. It's got some humor to it. It's very stylish and stylized. I don't know if you can necessarily recreate that in the film world. It looks a lot like Mad Max from a visual standpoint, so that might be a little weird. It's interesting to see how they differentiate themselves there. But I can't this is crazy. Like any movie with these people attached would be interesting, but now that it's like it's also a video game adaptation, you got my interest, right? You know what I mean? Jeremy, does this interest you at all?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Marvel has found a writer for its Blade film. This is the Watchmen writer Stacey Osei Kafur, I believe, and has begun working on a script for the Mahershala Ali vehicle. So it's still a ways off. The script is still being written. Good pedigree here when we're talking about writers from the Watchmen, right? HBO series. Blade always felt like something that's very kind of like the stuff that's happening in the MCU is over here, then Blade's kind of off to the side, doing his own thing, fighting vampires or whatever the heck he does. He's a daywalker, I believe. So, so I don't really like. For me, it's like this movie can come whenever it's coming. Like I'm not like waiting with bated breath for this, but it is exciting. I mean, Mahershala Ali led Blade movie is interesting. I mean, we said this when he was introduced. This is now 2 years ago when he was introduced at Comic-Con. So I don't know, Jeremy. Not a lot to talk about here, but does the Watchmen writer excite you when you think of Blade?
I don't know. I guess.
Yeah, we don't know enough about her work specifically, but I think it's interesting to note just because I think they're clearly looking to find talented people.
Yeah, I mean, I'm struggling. I don't know what the tonal crossover is between Watchmen and Blade, and it doesn't necessarily need to be. Like, she's obviously a great writer because Watchmen was a great show. So awesome that she's involved with the project. I was a huge fan of the earlier Blade movies, even though they aren't connected to the MCU.
They are considered to be some of the most influential movies in terms of the tone of the existing MCU that we have today. That a lot of people say that we wouldn't have the MCU without Blade. Obviously, it gets pretty crazy as you get further into the Blade series, right? But I'm just looking over her.
I don't remember. Have they announced that they're going R-rated for Blade or no?
They haven't yet.
Okay.
I mean, we haven't had an R-rated MCU thing yet. We know that Deadpool's going to be, and probably be the first one to kind of break that threshold. Do you think, does Blade need to be rated R? I don't know if it needs to be.
I don't know if it needs to be, but it would certainly benefit from it.
Just like, so you just like have so much blood, just like blood everywhere.
Blade is John Wick with vampires. That's what it comes down to. You could have an R-rated Blade movie that would be badass. Obviously, there'd be more story to it than John Wick.
Right. So speaking of John Wick, you finally now watched all the John Wick movies.
Yeah.
What's
watch them all back.
What a crazy idea. So okay, not hard to talk about them separately when they're all kind of blended together in your brain like that. But which one stands out to you as like your favorite of that?
No, like they were all great. The third takes a weird turn. It's a completely sort of a left turn.
Right. There's that scene in the desert that is very strange.
They're all great in their own. They're all great in their own way. The second one kind of is forgotten in my mind just because I watched them all consecutively.
Right.
But yeah, no, solid, like entertaining action movies. Love it.
Cool. Okay, so let's keep moving. A film following events of the GameStop stock situation called The Anti-Social Network is in the works at MGM. And you know what? The first thing I have to say about this is that I'm disappointed in MGM for a company that is constantly in danger of going under. It's like every other year we're hearing about MGM is looking to find ways to stay afloat. Basically, James Bond is their only property that makes them any money. And they're probably set to lose money on the new James Bond movie because of COVID. So MGM might go away, but this is not going to save you, MGM. I'm sorry, and also
a knee-jerk reaction.
The title it's not even a good title. The Anti-Social Network is not a good name for a movie about the GameStop stock situation. Because if it's about Reddit, it's just a bad title, and it plays off the Social Network, which is a good movie, and it just doesn't make any sense from a title standpoint for me. So I don't know, Jeremy, what do you think of this whole thing? I think it's an interesting. I think the whole event around GameStop is interesting. I don't know if they necessarily need a movie in development already, but I don't know, Jeremy, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. It's an interesting event, and I guess the story just broke that. Yeah, they just have the rights to it, and it's going to be a movie. Great. Like, what else is there to talk about?
Right. Okay. Edgar Wright has revealed that the script for Baby Driver 2 is complete, so we know that that movie is coming. Did you guys like Baby Driver?
I think you guys both did. I haven't seen it yet.
It's a very stylish, fun movie. I am interested in a Baby Driver 2, just generally speaking. So this is exciting. I think more Edgar Wright stuff is good.
Always.
So I'm just, again, not much to talk about here either. Just wanted to mention that it's still happening, and I'm still excited about it. Jeremy, were you a fan of the original Baby Driver?
Yeah, I did like the original.
Okay. So is this something that you'd be like, okay, yeah, this movie deserves a sequel? I'm ready.
Yeah, I thought, with like there's like a lot of stars in the movie. I definitely thought it was going to garner like a sequel.
Okay.
So,
well, speaking of sequels, a direct sequel to the original Cloverfield. So you guys remember the original Cloverfield found footage style movie, right? One of the masters of viral marketing at the time, when that was still kind of a new thing that you could do. Anyway, there's like I said, a sequel that's in the works. It won't be a found footage movie. My initial gut reaction to this is that I don't think this movie needs a sequel, and that even if it did, it's just too late, I feel like, for this to be interesting. A direct sequel to the original movie now is not something that I've even thought about for probably 5 years.
Well, I don't know. I mean, the movie already has 2 sequels.
Well, I mean, loosely.
Well, no, but it's all the same universe. There's the same monster. Presumably the same universe. I won't get into the latest one. I don't know if people would consider that spoiler territory or not, but whatever. Right. But there's still so much mystery around it that I'd be very interested in a direct sequel to the original movie.
Okay, so in your opinion, what is a direct sequel? Get a spitball. What is a direct sequel of Cloverfield about?
So it'll be whatever is bridging the gap between Cloverfield and 10 Cloverfield Lane. It's the fallout after the initial attack from the monster. So it's after all the found footage. I doubt we would meet up with any of those characters. I don't even think any of them survive, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I think they all die. But do you think someone finds the camcorder or whatever?
I don't know. Maybe that would be like a fun fan servicey sort of thing to do. But yeah, like that movie essentially ends with the destruction of New York and a monster on the loose. What happens next is going to be interesting.
Right. Jeremy, what do you think? Do you want A, want a Cloverfield sequel, and B, what would it be if you do?
Yeah, to me it just sounds like they're trying to cash in on the hype over big monster movies. So,
right,
if it's not going to be the found footage thing, then it's just going to be another
Kong
monster
Godzilla
movie. So,
yeah.
But those are the bigger. Like, no one remembers what the monster was called in Cloverfield.
I don't think it had a name. You don't get you get like no information in that movie. It's just like a tone poem. You're basically just with these people the whole time. You don't really know any of them, and you don't really get any
you have those offshoots and whatnot. Like people are aware of it. There's definitely a name for it. Like it's
one of those things.
Is that exciting? I don't know.
It feels like they're cashing in on the brand there.
I don't know if it's fair to say that they're cashing in because they've been consistently making sequels. Like that's not cashing in. That's just continuing.
The thing with the Cloverfield stuff that's interesting is that some of the Cloverfield branded movies were originally designed to be Cloverfield movies, and others were shoehorned in to be Cloverfield movies. So that name was added in as basically a marketing tactic. And I don't remember which one, but so I don't know how much like the Cloverfield name like commands respect these days. I don't know. I mean, I think this will be the true test.
I think it's gone both ways too, because that movie Underwater
was like originally supposed
with Kristen Stewart was meant to be part of there were rumors at one point. I don't know if it was meant to be. How could we ever know? But it was meant to be part of the same universe, and then it got switched. So,
well, speaking of things that were meant to be a part of other things, the writer director of Pacific Rim Uprising, Stephen S. DeKnight, you might recognize from Spartacus and Buffy, actually. He on Twitter mentioned that someone asked him if they were ever considering doing a tie-in with Kong and Godzilla. He said that Pacific Rim 3 was originally supposed to end with a hint to them joining forces or whatever, teaming up.
Crazy.
It seems like that's not going to happen. I think that the Pacific Rim brand is basically dead now. But I mean, Kong versus Godzilla is good enough for me. Although there's a distinct lack of giant mechs in those movies. So
yeah. figures.
Okay. The 4 new DC Showcase animated shorts are supposed to be released in 21 and 2022. Don't know a lot of details here, but I do know that I liked the Showcase shorts. They did one on I think the one that sticks out in my mind, or there's one about that ghost character, the spirit character. What's his name? Green Spirit? No. The Spectre. That's the one. That one was interesting. They did one with Shazam that was really interesting. I think
Spectre, Catwoman, Green Arrow. And then Shazam, Black Adam, Superman was.
Isn't there also one with what's his name, the cowboy?
Jonah Hex.
Yeah. Anyway, so I'm just interested. I think these are good, fun ways to explore DC characters, the C-list characters, the B-list characters sometimes that just don't get enough spotlight. Yeah. And then because presumably those are going to come to HBO Max, they're just fun fillers that you can put in between. And it was kind of what they were designed for before with Cartoon Network, which is that like they could fill gaps between episodes and stuff like that. I just think it just adds to the package a little bit. So interesting. It's interesting to see what they think is the right characters. Okay, let's take a quick break, and we'll come back and start talking about TV. We'll end with WandaVision, spoiler conversation, and then we'll wrap it up there. So we'll be right back in a couple minutes. Really need to more. Okay, we're back, and we're going to be talking about the Golden Globe nominees for 2021. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because the Golden Globes are always one of those things that we talk about this every year around this time. They're just a weird thing. They're the Hollywood Foreign Press is who votes on them. It's always just these like eclectic mix of things. They've got these weird breaks between dramas and comedies. You can decide which category you place your film in, which creates all these weird confusions around how like The Martian can win Best Comedy. Makes no sense.
I feel like that's gonna be referenced every single time, and it's insanity.
It is, because that one is the biggest, most egregious, obvious example of that one not belonging in the correct category, right? And they just like, we think we can win here, and we're gonna work. So, I'll just mention a couple of things that kind of stand out. So for Best Motion Picture Drama, I haven't seen any of these movies, but The Father, Mank, Nomadland, Promising Young Woman, and The Trial of Chicago 7. Actually, that's not true. I have seen The Trial of Chicago 7. And I have not seen Mank, but it's on my list of things to watch on Netflix. Trial of Chicago 7, that's by the way, what's his name? The Newsroom, Aaron Sorkin. Aaron Sorkin directed kind of piece. Feels very Aaron Sorkin-y. Not as good as The Social Network, I would say, in terms of a tonally similar film. But still fun. A fun watch. Jeff Kanata from the Slash Filmcast and DLC always talks about how, for him, Aaron Sorkin's dialogue is his action scenes. You don't go to an Aaron Sorkin movie for an action scene, but you go for the dialogue, and the dialogue is very good here. And again, maybe not the most accurate historical representation of this thing, but I think it gives you enough that if you want to know more, it certainly kind of whets the palate a little bit. Whets your appetite. Okay, Best Picture, musical or comedy. So who knows if these are even musicals or comedies. Borat, the subsequent movie film. Okay, that's a comedy,
Sure.
right? Hamilton, musical,
Ding.
right? Music.
Could go either way.
Okay. Is this just like the concept of music itself? Is now it's like you know what, guys? It's just reading is now up for best motion picture comedy. Palm Springs, have seen that. Have you guys seen Palm Springs? Very fun
I've seen a little
time
bit of
loop. You only watched a little bit. You didn't watch the whole thing.
Nah.
Really interesting. I thought it was very funny. And the prom. If Hamilton doesn't walk away with this, I will be shocked. Let's put it that way. And by the way, I'm going to implore everyone again: if you haven't seen Hamilton on Disney Plus, it's long, but there's an intermission, and I would recommend if you want to watch it in 2 parts. It is very, very good, and it is very entertaining and well worth a watch. And what they did with the Disney Plus stuff is just so well done in terms of capturing the stage play of it, nature of it. It's very interesting. Well, big recommendation there. Comedy TV series again. Things that stand out to me, things like The Great. I don't know if Dan, have you seen much of The Great or anything?
No, I mean, I told you, I haven't seen anything on this list. The Golden Globes, for me, it serves as like a reminder that I have to watch Oscar movies. It's like Oscars are coming next. So these movies were nominated, so you should probably watch some of these.
Some of these and there'll be a little bit of crossover. I think there's less and less crossover every year now between the Golden Globes and like what happens at the Oscars. Yeah. The BAFTAs and stuff like that seem to be more better indicators for what the Oscars are going to do. Here's the thing, though, Dan. Best TV series comedy. What's important here is that Ted Lasso is nominated. and if it doesn't win, it's going up against Schitt's Creek, which is pretty tough.
And the final season of Schitt's Creek.
Yeah. Right? So it's okay because Ted Lasso, it's just hitting its stride. So there's still plenty of chances for it to win. But what's crazy here is that Emily in Paris was nominated, which from all accounts is a terrible show. but it's set in Paris, so it appeals to the Hollywood foreign press in a very interesting way. That's kind of stuff that I always get interested about in this thing. And I don't know. There's nothing really else here that jumps out at me. Gary Oldman's performance for Mank has been nominated.
Chadwick Boseman's nominated.
Chadwick Boseman's nominated actually for Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, which is his last performance. Definitely chance for a posthumous award there. Best actress, blah, blah, blah. Is there anything standing out there?
Viola Davis, anytime she's on a list, she's going to stand out.
I feel like, is she not nominated every year for something? Sometimes for multiple things. Yeah. She's very good.
Frances McDormand as well.
Yeah, I mean, these are hardly like niche actors you haven't really heard of before. I mean, the best actor in a motion picture comedy, like Andy Samberg is nominated here. James Corden. Lin-Manuel Miranda for Hamilton, Sacha Baron Cohen. I mean, this will be nothing else. It'll be interesting to see how they do this show, socially distanced, quote unquote, or if they just put it on like normal. I can't imagine they will. This is going to have to be a completely digital event, I'd imagine. So that'll be kind of the first of that ilk. It'll be interesting to see how they do that. Jeremy, anything from the Golden Globe stuff stick out to you?
No, I haven't looked at it.
Okay. One thing that was interesting was that Harley Quinn, the Birds of Prey, got a nom somewhere. I don't remember for what. I don't know exactly for what category it was nominated. But a movie that a lot of people didn't like, and I think for understandable reasons.
A lot of people did like it too. So.
But a lot of people did like it too. Exactly. So it's interesting to see it come back here. Another one of those movies that maybe some people might have been the last major movie they saw in theaters. Was that. And again, I like to see that The Great was nominated. It's a very entertaining show on Amazon and would recommend that as well. Okay. Like I said, I didn't want to spend too much time on that. We'll talk about it more once the actual awards are happen. And, of course, we'll be covering the Oscars like we always do. And we'll talk about those nominations once they come out. There's been a couple shortlist announcements already, but for categories that most people aren't that excited about. And also, I refuse to talk about Oscar shortlists because they're just going to announce the actual lists in like a couple weeks. So it's a trailer for a trailer thing. It's all over again. It's just in different form. Okay. Interestingly enough, Marvel is working on a Wakanda show for Disney Plus. That's all we know. What do you guys think of that?
Well, I mean, you definitely have to pick up on Wakanda. Like it's a huge part of the MCU. Yes, it's obviously tragic that Chadwick Boseman passed away,
Right.
but they are going to want to pick up that storyline in some fashion. So it's not surprising necessarily. It's a little quick, I would say.
Well, I mean, because the show is called Wakanda, not called Black Panther, I feel like it can be about anything.
Fair enough. But obviously this.
Well, they already said they're making a sequel to Black Panther, and they're gonna pay their respects and do it properly as well. But I think with Wakanda, it's taken on such a huge, just role of its own. Like since that movie, like everyone's aware of Wakanda. Like,
right.
So
it's referenced in the Coming to America trailer. Like the Coming to America, they basically say. Yeah. He's like, so you're like the king of Wakanda. He's like, yeah, but Wakanda's a made up place, and they're like,
yeah,
is
exactly.
it though? Right.
Yeah. So I just think it makes sense to expand the lore there, and you'll get more characters from there. So I think it's just a no-brainer.
So what kind of show do you think this is? Like, if purely from a fan perspective, it's a show about Wakanda, quote unquote. I wouldn't mind something that's a little bit more unstructured in the sense that you can kind of explore different.
Like a day in the life of Wakanda.
Well, there's just so you got all these different tribes, right? And you've got these like the super advanced society, and it's just a very like fascinating place. That if it's just like, well, hey, it's just a sequel to Black Panther 2, and it falls, Shuri, I think is her name, or whatever happens after the events of that movie, and it's just basically a sequel called Wakanda. I don't think that's as interesting to me. I would. If you're going to call a show Wakanda, I want it to explore maybe the history of the nation a bit more. Something that's not just here's more Black Panther stuff. Although at the same time, it's like that's kind of a big ask when the most interesting part of Wakanda is Black Panther.
It really largely depends on what else is going on in the MCU. It would be cool if it were like a prequel, like a Wakanda, 100 years in the past sort of thing.
Right.
But that wouldn't tie in very deeply with the MCU, so I don't think that they would go that route. Like it's all about the interconnectedness or connectivity.
I guess I'm wondering if do you think as we explore the MCU more and we move into this kind of like this multi-dimensional stuff and we do more time traveling, if there's not more room for self-contained stories inside the MCU? And what I mean by self-contained stories, of course, they connect in the sense that they took place in the same world, but they don't need to influence the larger world all the time, and they don't need to be influenced by the larger world all the time. They just can kind of be their own thing. I think of Blade as a great example of that.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Blade is. Wakanda's not. Wakanda can't be. It's too intrinsic to the MCU.
Yeah, I suppose. But again, that's what I mean by like prequel. You could do a prequel that would be less interconnected.
Theoretically, yeah.
Okay. Any other final thoughts on this, Jeremy?
No.
Okay. Moving on. Nintendo scrapped a live-action Zelda series that they were planning with Netflix. I think we even talked about this. After the news of the project leaked online. Nintendo, very secretive company, very old company, has a poor track record with their content being made into films and television shows.
So does every other video game.
Right, but I mean, I think Nintendo, because their series are so huge on the video game side, and then the representations of those in television movies are so bad. Like, it's just such a wide gap between, like, I think obviously the Mario movie is the greatest example of that.
I would say they're also some of the movies that are the hardest to adapt. Right? Like, how do you make a Mario movie, really?
Well, they're making one. It's coming up by DreamWorks is making it.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's going to be animated. There's all these questions. There's all these questions about, like, here's the thing. I think you could easily do a live action Zelda series, and on Netflix or anything. I think it would be interesting. I think that's
huge. It would be amazing,
right? But there's just a lot of questions about like how does that even work? Does the main character really not talk? I don't think you can make a series, a movie or television series with a mute main character. I don't think you can do it.
Obviously, that's not going to happen. That happens in the games because you're reading everything and you're intaking everything. It wouldn't make any sense translated to a different medium to what you would speak.
I agree, but there's been a lot of like. So this news story has kind of rejuvenated the conversation around what does a live action Zelda really look like, right? And I don't think Game of Thrones is the model you go with that because that's too political. Those shows are not really about the politics of Hyrule. It's more of an adventure, action adventure, right?
It's more like classic fantasy,
right?
Than like new age stuff.
Princess Diaries kind of has the vibe that Zelda kind of does, which is silly because it's like super over the top.
You mean Princess Bride?
Princess Bride, not Princess Diaries.
Princess Diaries is
Hilarious. You're right. That's a wholly
completely
different
does.
movie. Hilarious and really bad movies. Okay, yeah. So I mean, I don't remember. I don't remember them being good. Let's put it that way. Yeah, Princess Bride is a kind of a tone I think you could strike, maybe a little bit more serious. But is the vibe I think you would maybe go for there. What would you guys do in terms of recreating something like Zelda in live action? Would you retell a game story like Ocarina of Time or something like that, or just tell something new?
I would say something new, like something it's going to be like an amalgamation of a bunch of the games, right? Like some of the side quests and the more top of mind storylines from multiple games kind of brought together, right? If it's a series, you can do those sort of one-off episodes,
right,
and hit those story notes. Yeah, I mean, it's obviously not
canceled,
happening, so
yeah, but I think that it's so yeah. I mean, it's the story here is that it was canceled, and it was because it was leaked online, which I think is like a really petty kind of reason to cancel a project like that. It just in video games, you know, the reveal of the new game is a big deal, and when those things are leaked, it sucks. But in movies and television, this stuff happens all the time. There's rumors of people being cast, but different writers being attached to projects. Like I think this idea maybe Nintendo's bringing of this like ultra secrecy to the television film world is unrealistic, maybe. That being said, we've heard very little about the Mario stuff, but we do know the Mario stuff is happening. So I don't know. One of the interesting things that I heard about this that may be more true than I originally thought about was that we know that Nintendo has a relationship with Universal. They've opened up a theme park with them. Their DreamWorks is a part of Universal, and they're working the Mario stuff. So maybe they're basically just using that as an excuse to back out of a deal with Netflix, and so they can kind of double down on what they're doing with Universal Paramount. So I don't know. Is really what we're getting at there. But
really don't know anything.
Well, that's the point. They're super secretive. But I think I would be shocked if Nintendo's not in the process of workshopping ways to bring Zelda to live action. In
Zelda, out of all of Nintendo's properties, is probably the best. Zelda and Metroid, yeah, would be the best for movie or film or TV adaptations.
Apparently, Nintendo's really hard to work with in this stuff. Rumor has it when they were working on a Metroid movie around the same time that Metroid Prime 2 was coming out, that Nintendo was constantly like kiboshing a bunch of like story ideas that they had around
because they want to protect their stuff, right?
Yeah, but this is around
it
like
all stems from the Mario movie. They were completely burned on that, and they don't want any of their IP being tarnished with visuals or stories and directors and all that stuff. It's just their IP is like sacred at this point, so they want to do it right. They've hired the Illumination Studio. It's going to look exactly like the video games for Mario. So for Zelda, it's going to be a while before they really, agree to do a live action to where people are in control, and whether it's a movie or a TV series, it's Nintendo. It's for kids. It's for everyone. So it's tough.
I do think that Nintendo probably needs to relax a little bit around that stuff for film and television adaptations because they are an adaptation. They're not the same. And like, so if you're telling a movie or you're making a movie about Metroid and you can't tell the audience anything about the character, that's, I feel like, really difficult to do. It really hamstrings you as a creator, which is probably why a lot of this stuff hasn't been done. We're in the year 2021 and we've never had a Metroid movie. It's kind of crazy to think about, actually, because it's such an obviously cinematic.
Yeah, but also with that IP, it's one of their least sellable franchises. Like they've made barely any money off Metroid. That's just true. People like us just know about it because it's such a cool sci-fi world, and we've seen the character pop up, throughout the year, especially with Smash Bros and stuff like that. So
that's really where my most connection to that character probably comes from, and then Super Metroid.
I think they should just start with these animation studios just to really recreate the visual style of the games, like one for one, like especially Mario, and even like a Star Fox movie. I think would be sweet. Like you have this team, all these cool characters, and the action could be sweet. I just think start basic like that. Really get those projects
commercials though? Those are pretty sick. You guys remember those? There was Metroid Prime live action commercials.
Yeah.
And they're very cool. They're very cool.
Oh, yeah.
They came out around the same time. Remember those Halo live action commercials? That like inspired this like we need a Halo movie because of that. And we actually are getting a Halo series now finally. Man, I actually can't. That's one of the things like I really can't wait to see like the first footage from that. Like that's exciting in my opinion. So more video game stuff. As you'll notice, I think there's been a couple news stories about them.
Yeah.
I think we're only going to see more of that as we move forward.
For it.
Okay. Speaking of animation, in something that versus live action, Game of Thrones. There is an animated series in the works at HBO. We don't know much details about it, but it's interesting to me because Game of Thrones lore can be really, really big. It can get maybe not as quite as vast as the Lord of the Rings in terms of scale of battles and stuff like that, but some pretty big stuff. And we're talking like lots of dragons and stuff like that in there. Animation really lets you tell some of those stories in ways that you would have had a really hard time doing it in live action. So, thinking, Dan, in your opinion, what story in the Game of Thrones lore is best suited for an animation recreation?
Well, I mean, working off the assumption that it's a budgetary decision, right? It's about the CG. Then definitely Dance of the Dragons. I think that they're going to be doing Dance of the Dragons anyways. It's going to be almost impossible for them to do it in live action. So I think this makes the most sense. In Dance of the Dragons, without spoiling anything, there's probably like 20 different dragons. So it's a lot.
Hey, sorry, we got Chris. I don't know how to pronounce Chris Urbio, artist. Said our sound is crackling. I know we're working on it. I think it's Zencaster, but if you tune into our actual downloadable podcast, you can find that on Apple iTunes and stuff like that. The audio is better there in the final reproduction of the crackle free since 1993. So yeah, again, Apple podcasts, all the Google podcasts, you can find it all there. We do this live, which is how this is coming up at all. We do this live on Twitch, Periscope, and YouTube, and we like to announce these when we're doing it day of. So it behooves you to be on Twitter to know when it's happening. And also, if you subscribe, you get alerts when we go live. Okay, but hey, thanks for tuning in, and I hope you stick around despite the crackly audio. I think it's Jeremy whose audio is crackly. No offense, Jeremy, but it's not your fault. We won't hold it. Jeremy, what do you think of an animated Game of Thrones series?
It's just not for me.
It's just not for Did you finish Game of Thrones? No.
Yeah,
all right, so fair enough. The biggest show of all time, you never finished it. That's crazy. I mean, I can understand if you it's a big task to catch up if you fell behind, and it's quite a bit. So I understand,
especially with the last, there was a lot of controversy around the last couple of seasons, a lot of disappointment with how the episodes were handled. So you just being kind of tangentially aware of that, I can see it being hard to get back into the show.
Well, we know that there's a live action prequel series in the works. There's actually news around that. I think the full cast has been announced. There's no real actors from that group that anyone's really going to be familiar with. They're going with a lot of unknown actors again, or at least unknown to the popular actors again, which will probably generate a whole slew of Pedro Pascal's other actors who are going to spin off into new things, which is great. But if you want to look at that, I didn't include it here just because I don't know what we can really bring to that conversation other than we're excited about to see what that show actually is when it starts filming. I think HBO is very cognizant of the fact that they can't wait around with Game of Thrones, and they really need to get new content out there because the finale left a very poor taste in a lot of people's mouths, and the longer you kind of let it sit, the less people care.
Well, they're going to probably try to time it with when the book comes out in 2021.
Okay, Dan.
At least the news will come out around that time.
Right.
That would be the way to play it, at least. But
sure, if that book ever does come out, I suppose. Okay, so this is kind of just one of those like feel good stories that I think everyone really likes. That everyone's gonna like. Donald Glover and Phoebe Waller-Bridge are creating and starring in a Mr. and Mrs. Smith series for Amazon. These are just the most charismatic actors. They're so fun and funny, and this is just like a vehicle for them to just be. They have such good chemistry too. Like this, everything about them together is going to be really, really fun. I don't really care about the Mr. and Mrs. Smith brand, but like I said, it's just an excuse to get those actors on TV together, which is fine with me. What do you guys think?
Yeah, no, it's. I feel like they can get very creative with that concept because it's a series, right? Not a movie, right? Yep. So it's prolonged throughout the series. There's an internal mystery the entire time. That's already great for audiences, right?
Yeah, but the problem with that is that you're super far ahead of the characters. If the reveal is that they don't know that they're both spies
the
entire time.
The audience is aware of the big lie, but they're not aware of all. Like, there's going to be the day-to-day what's going on in the episode. The drama is going to be, the other person's going to find out, and then what do I do? Right? And it's this back and forth, sort of increasing, always raising the stakes. At least the way I see that show, that would be amazing.
I vaguely recall the movie being like a fun romp. Like it was just like kind of just whatever. Again, a star vehicle. Which is what it feels like for this. Jeremy, does this excite you at all? Donald Glover, Phoebe Waller-Bridge?
Yeah, anything with Donald Glover in particular, I get pretty excited about. I guess with the two of them, I guess it's probably more comedic than.
I guess so. I don't know. Was the movie not that funny? I don't remember. I feel like it had a comic.
Well, the movie was certainly, it had comedic elements, but it was, I think, certainly more like a kind of action movie. First and foremost, but I think a lot of the humor came from just the craziness of the situation, right? And how they kind of were so calm about it.
Where they're constantly finding guns hidden throughout the house. That was always fun.
Yeah, like they're like arguing, but like arguing, dancing, but like taking out enemies at the same time.
Yeah, it's really stylish. Like again, it's like in one of those stylish things. It's like there's a vibe to the Mr. and Mrs. Smith thing. And again, Donald Glover is just so charismatic and fun to watch. I think most people would say the same thing. I've not seen a lot of Phoebe Waller-Bridge stuff, but the stuff I have seen she is really good. Everyone says they have amazing chemistry. I think I've really only seen them in solo together, so I don't have a lot of context for that. But a lot of the stuff about this news was just like people showing them gifs of them kind of doing the behind the scenes stuff from Solo and like the red carpet stuff, and then just like having a blast together. Sweet. So like, okay, great. I mean, that alone sells me. So I'm interested. And Amazon, as we know, desperate for content that people want to watch. So just like every streaming service that's not named Disney Plus and Netflix. So by the way, the Super Bowl was on last Sunday, right? And with the Super Bowl, you get Super Bowl commercials, and there was a couple of fun ones, but the ones that were really weird and stood out were the Paramount Plus commercials, which just featured a bunch of characters from the like CBS Paramount catalog climbing up the Paramount Mountain, like the logo, and narrated by Jean-Luc Picard, and it's like it's the weirdest shit, and it wasn't funny, wasn't clever, it felt so forced, and it was all just about like getting people to care about, like it was literally like there was like Beavis and Butthead were making jokes. It's like really not that creative, in my opinion. Like the mountain in the Paramount Mountain is the least interesting thing about Paramount. I guess, I don't know. Just if you can go check them out, they're all on. There was kind of like a bunch of them. They were telling a preceding story of them climbing up the mountain as they went through the game. Different commercials were, and they reached the top. At the end, spoilers, they reached the top. But go check them out. I'm just thinking about Paramount Plus as just being like another streaming service that, like, oh man, they have a catalog at least of stuff, but they're in tough. I feel
like it's too late right now to enter that game, but it may not be if they have enough of a back catalog and enough interest in those.
Speaking of which, they're looking to revive Frasier for Paramount Plus.
There you go. That'll get you some subscribers.
Frasier's so interesting to me because it's a show that I did watch because it was always on right after school, but the humor went always over my head. Like I had no idea what these people were talking about when I was watching the show, and I had no frame of reference for Frasier as a character from Cheers. It was basically just the rapport between Frasier and Niles that kept me entertained to even tune into that show, because it was like little highbrow for like a 14-year-old kid,
Probably.
you know. So I would be interested to see what a Frasier reboot is, but if it doesn't include Niles, I'm not in. Fuck it. I'm putting my foot down on that. Sure. What do you get? Do you guys have attachment to Frasier in any way?
Obviously not to the same degree that you do. I didn't watch the show much as a kid, so it was a popular show back in the day. I feel like it's the kind of thing I would have been into had I been of the right age, maybe, but
it's held in high regard in terms of like sitcoms of the era. Maybe okay. Here's the thing though. How much money do you want to bet? And put this in the book, Dan.
Mm-hmm.
That the Frasier reboot is going to be out. Frasier starting a podcast. Put it in the book, man. Put it in the book. Because like what, he was doing a radio show before. Radio's dying. Yada yada yada. Frasier's doing a podcast in his reboot. That's the story, and he doesn't know how to do it because he's old, quote unquote.
That
right?
doesn't sound interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. That's my prediction on that. Jeremy, do you have any attachment to Frasier?
None whatsoever.
None whatsoever. Okay, fair enough.
I was ready for that one.
Okay. Brooklyn Nine-Nine is set to end with season 8, which is the next coming season. A season that was delayed, has been reconfigured, changed. We don't know really anything about season 8 of Brooklyn Nine-Nine. All we know now is that it is going to be the final season. I mean, a lot of the kind of Black Lives Matter stuff, I think, really affected the show, and rightfully so, in the sense that it is a cop show. They wanted to address that stuff, and I'm guessing here that they really were struggling with how to do that, and I don't know if they have enough content. I think if you really do a hard change for a season like this to extend it after into a 9th or 10th season, I don't know. Without having seen it, speculating here, but I'm guessing that that's where that announcement comes from. That they kind of found a way to tell this new story, but it ultimately also means the end of the story of these characters. So I don't know.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, it's going to be a bit of a turn for the show to get into more serious stuff because they really haven't. The show has been about cops the entire time, and they've just been goofing off.
Right, and in serious moments they've been goofing off.
So it'll be interesting to see. I don't know if it's. I don't know if we could or should speculate about that. Like, I wouldn't say that the BLM stuff has made the show too hard to write about.
They did say that they did say that that's why they were changing the show, and they did say that they were struggling with that. So I'm speculating. It's not a complete shot in the dark here.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it will. The time will tell. Like I'm a huge fan of Brooklyn Nine-Nine, and I'm a big fan. I wish I could remember the name of the creator now. His work is just really strong. I think it's very funny and just very refreshing in comparison to like a lot of the other sitcom comedy stuff on television. And even though he came from like the stuff that was very traditional at the time, Parks and Rec, right? So again, I don't want to. We shouldn't speculate too much. Time will tell with this, but it is upsetting to find out that they're ending with season 8. Who knows? Maybe we'll get an Archer situation where they say they're ending, and then they'll just be like, you know what? Actually, we'll just do another season, just cause. Who knows? Who knows? HBO is in talks with new writers as they look to find a new voice for True Detective season 4. Jeremy, I'm going to turn to you here because you are our kind of True Detective evangelist, I suppose. What do you make of going away from I can't remember the curator's name now.
Nick Pizzolatto.
Right, going away from him and his vision, following the 3rd season, which I think the 3rd season is pretty good. What do you think about this? A new vision.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's kind of disappointing, but also exciting to get new creators involved who are obviously very aware of what works for that series. I think, if anything, Nick really brought forth kind of how you go about a season and how to work around the mystery and who's involved and whatnot. So I think having a fresh take on that, but utilizing those main standards that it should have could be very good. So, but it's also disappointing because maybe obviously consensus stumbles in the 2nd season, but finds the footing of the 3rd, and then they decide, okay, we'll just go with someone entirely new.
Well, and it's possible that Nick wants to do other stuff, right? I mean, we don't know if it's just that they're looking to find a new voice
true. But also, the third season there had ties to the original season.
That's true. Loose ties.
And also the both actors are executive producers, I think, on the show as well. So maybe he doesn't want to go down that rabbit hole, and they do. Like, I don't know. Like,
I mean, so I guess you mentioned like there's I think a pretty clear understanding at this point now what works for the show and what doesn't. What do you think it is that does work for the kind of the pillars of True Detective?
Well, I think we know now that you can't really have too many players in the game. Like, the second season had a lot of people to learn about and their relationships. The third one really just focused on one individual or two, but also different time frame. The time frames thing, I think,
is super important.
Is the super important thing. I think that's just, for some reason, it's just so intriguing. Jumping between the timelines, and then whatever timeline you're in, you learn something new.
Yeah,
it's super cool.
It's so satisfying to be drip fed these clues, right? And you're putting together because it's ultimately a mystery show. The True Detective, the name it's in the name, but to be able to go from you're in modern day and you learn something that informs your understanding of the past. And then when you're in the past, it informs your understanding of the future, or it feels like 3D chess in the sense that you feel very clever when you start putting the things together. The show isn't necessarily maybe as clever or hard to understand as maybe people like to give it credit for. It's not that obtuse. I just think that the time periods thing is really where people get excited, and they managed to figure it out. First, obviously, the first season, the third season. Time stuff works. I don't know, maybe quite as much. It works really well, but maybe not quite as much as the first season. And then season 2 didn't even try. So in that sense, they didn't do the time travel stuff. So if you're going for a new voice, a new direction for the series, I think you're right. I think it needs to maintain the time differential thing, the nonlinear format. But other than that, I mean, as a show that's what's the word I'm looking for here?
Well, it's an anthology.
Anthology series. Thank you. You can go anywhere, right?
Well, that's the whole thing. Is it kind of benefits the show because it's an anthology to bring new blood in, right? Because each season is so distinct and separate. That being said, like you mentioned, Jeremy, there was connective tissue between the first and third, and even a little bit the second.
Well, yeah, very little.
But it to me, it always felt like maybe he was building to something eventually. There was also a lot of references to Lovecraft stuff. I think that's just probably because the writer's a fan of Lovecraft, but I was hoping maybe there's some connective tissue there too.
You think it would get more?
There were notes in the first season. It was Carcosa and the Yellow King, but in the third season, I think there was a book. I'm not sure if it was the Necronomicon, but there was a book that was a Lovecraftian book. There was weird things like that, and part of the value of these shows for me is the mystery, right? Week to week, you're following along with this mystery. And that larger mystery of whether or not the seasons would interconnect was
that. Yeah,
for me.
I think that's interesting. I think I don't know if there's any reason they can't still. Just because you don't have, Pizzolatto.
He's the creator and he wrote all 3 seasons. I would like if he had a vision. I would like for him to see it through. Right?
Sure. Yeah, that's fair. I mean, and maybe he doesn't. I mean, that's the thing. I would like to hear from Nick on this and be and understand kind of where his thoughts are. I mean, obviously he's not going to call into the show, but I think he might talk to Vanity Fair or something, and we can report on it. But that would be interesting. We'll have to explore that more. I want more True Detective. I'm always interested in who they're casting. The casting decisions are always interesting. The kind of the time frame, the setting is always interesting. I really love the Louisiana setting of the first season. I don't think they've topped that. I don't think they've topped that since then. The first season is obviously the best one.
Definitely.
But just from a tonal standpoint, I don't know if you can kind of beat that. Yeah, I guess we'll stay tuned on this. Obviously, HBO wants more True Detective, so that's I think the good part of that. Okay, moving on. The creator of Over the Garden Wall, which I'm not familiar with, has been tapped by Netflix to create a Redwall series for the streamer. Redwall has had a series before. Redwall, obviously based on, these are children's books.
I don't know how obvious it is. I don't know if a lot of people are familiar.
They know it's obvious. Okay, so Redwall is a children's book series by Brian Jacques. that's a fantasy series that stars animals as the main characters. They're all
Anthropomorphic.
Okay, thank you. Oh my god. Okay.
It's like it's mice and squirrels and rabbits and badgers fighting stoats and weasels and snakes
with swords and bows and arrows
and castles and such.
Yeah, and abbeys, as you might expect. So if you would if you read them actually, there's the name Abbey's not in there, but there is a Redwall Abbey, the titular Redwall. It's a pretty expansive world. Like there's a lot of lore there. There was an animated show. I don't even remember who made it. It was a long time ago. And I remember there being weird controversy because they repainted the blood blue to make it look like it was like a puddle of water. At one point, a character falls off a wall, and they painted blood blue, and it was a anyway. It's been a very long time. We don't have a lot of details of this at this point. I am interested to see what they do here. I think you could do a really interesting kind of live action, quote unquote, style, animation style of this. It's probably very expensive. Other than like from a stylistic, I'm obviously, as you guys can tell, I'm a fan of these books. I read a lot of them. I would love a hand-drawn look, I think, here if I had to choose. But nothing's really done hand-drawn anymore. It's probably CG.
CG is definitely more likely.
Right. Does it excite you at all? The Redwall series excite you at all?
I mean, it does. Again, it's going to be geared to kids, so it's not going to be really my wheelhouse. But it's something that I would probably like to watch with my nieces and nephews if they'd be into it.
I think it's a gateway drug for fantasy for kids. I think, yeah. So there's a lot of stories to tell. Like I would love if they kind of started from from a timeline perspective. Kind of the Redwall book, the original one, has prequels and sequels. I wouldn't mind if they kind of started with the original story, like pre-Redwall being built, and kind of building to that. I think that's something that they haven't explored, at least on television yet, and is more interesting, I think, than the kind of the Redwall book, which has some mysteries and stuff. It's fun, but this idea of like a hero and then helping to develop like this abbey that you can then jump forward in time and then have that mystery and have a little bit more context for, I think is interesting. I don't know. Anyway, you have to know Redwall for me.
I feel like none of our listeners are going to know Redwall. So
well, maybe not. It's I think a fairly popular book series.
I read them all when I was a kid too. I hope if they do Salamandastron. Do you remember that one? That was a ridiculous name.
I was thinking more Matthias. Was it Matthias or
Matameo is one of them.
Yeah.
Martin the Warrior is
right.
Is the I don't think that's the first book. It's one of the first books.
He's like the modern timeline, quote unquote, character. There was like a previous mouse that was like the founder of Redwall, which I think was
Martin the Warrior.
Was it?
Yeah.
Okay. What do I think of then? Anyway, interesting here. I want to see what they do. If it's coming to Netflix, it probably means it's only 3 seasons. So whatever they go to tell is a 3-season arc and no longer because there's no guarantees. Okay, the CW and HBO Max are in talks to co-finance original shows to premiere on HBO Max, with the next day airing on the CW. Interesting here. Obviously, what it does is put more money into the CW shows and drives more viewers to HBO Max who are really invested in these shows. I think it's a net win here. Most people aren't tuning in Tuesdays at 6 p.m. for their Arrowverse stuff. They're probably DVRing it anyway. So I don't know how much that would really change for most people. But I guess the reason you'd even do this is because you still need people to tune into CW, so you still have it premiere the day of, not time, day and date. Jeremy, what do you make of this?
I don't know really. Actually, I don't know. Actually, I mean, like CW just has such a, its own kind of feel and look. So
right,
and they're longer. Like they're more episodes.
They're still very traditional, like 22 episode format. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just more content, so I guess that's what they're trying to do here.
Well, Greg Berlanti's, I think, he's the mastermind of all things DC TV right now, and he's obviously the creative Arrow and everything else that goes on with the CW stuff. I think we all kind of had a time. I don't know if we ever watched the CW stuff, but
I watched a little bit of Arrow, and then
Jeremy and I did. Watched a lot. It was kind of like our weekly comic book check-in. Instead of picking up the single issue issue every week. It was just like I could just tune into Arrow or Flash, and it'd be like oh, look, he's fighting Gorilla Grodd this week, like that kind of stuff was always fun. And it managed to like really, I think, master that like serial tone of like new adventure every week with like a longer kind of threaded mystery throughout. More, I think, Greg Berlanti is, I think, proven as a creator. Giving him more budget to kind of tell more intricate stories, I think, is only a good thing here. And ultimately, I think that's what this is about, just getting more money into the CW Arrowverse stuff. Some of the things have been canceled. We know that there was an Arrow spin-off show that was canceled before it even got off the ground. It's a tumultuous time for the Arrowverse right now. So maybe that means we can kind of transition to maybe a little bit a different style of storytelling for these characters. Or maybe if we're going to do a Flash show, and we're gonna do CW or DC stuff on TV, we can maybe tonally shift it up a little bit. Maybe make it a little bit. I don't want to use the term darker. A little bit more dramatic is the word I'm looking for.
If they wanted, excuse me, if they wanted to sort of have a similar tone to the DC stuff, the other DC stuff that's going to be on HBO Max, that kind of makes sense, I guess.
Who knows? We shall see. Okay. Oh, speaking of DC on television, Titans is getting another new Robin. So we've done all the Robins so far. So we've done Dick Grayson, and he's done his transition from Robin to Nightwing. Very cool. We've done Jason Todd is the next one, who's conflicted, as you expect from a Jason Todd. And now we're going to get a Tim Drake, and he's going to be played by Jay Kurgo, who I'm not familiar with, but I understand he's actually in The Batman, but not as I don't think as Robin, but he's in the movie The Batman. So this is interesting. I just like the idea. And by the way, again, he's going to be playing Tim Drake, and I just like this idea that this show is just like, hey, you know what? We're just going to do all the Robins, and we're going to have the oldest Batman known to man. This like 65-year-old man is playing Batman, and I'm fascinated. The show is so crazy because the second season is so nuts in terms of like its scope. It gets so much bigger, and I think it's not quite as good as maybe the first season, but it goes there. It's not afraid of just like, hey, yeah, we've got a crazy alien princess on our show, and we're gonna lean into that. So I give it props for that at least. Jeremy, does adding Tim Drake to Titans excite you at all for season 3? Because it does for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's kind of why we like this show and the universe they're creating, is because they're really taking the comic book history and the lore and just going all in on it. And one of those things is all Robins. I mean, a general fan of Batman.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like probably wouldn't be able to name all the Robins or even how many there are. So it's just super exciting for people like us.
That's such a good point too, because like we've never had a chance to really explore the Robins in live action, really in any really significant way, right? Most people only know of Dick Grayson, right, as Robin. I bet you a lot of people don't even know that Nightwing was Robin, just a casual fan.
Maybe.
And that like there's so much interesting story to mine from this, like these troubled teenagers, right, who are kind of taken under the wing of Batman. They're like, even with Batman just being a tangential character in Titans, the like emotional nature of being Robin is so fascinating, and I will argue that the show probably doesn't do the best job it could of exploring those things, but it definitely does do it. It definitely scratches the surface in terms of like this relationship, this dynamic between Dick and Jason. So it was really fascinating how Jason kind of saw his relationship with Batman versus how Dick saw his relationship with Batman. Like there's such interesting story elements here that sometimes get kind of caught up in sillier stuff. There's a lot of silly stuff in Titans too, but ultimately I think it's a pretty good show. I wouldn't say it's a great show. It's like pretty good is how it goes. And have you seen Ultimate one too?
I haven't seen the second season. So what I was about to ask, having not seen the second season though, Jason Todd is still in the show.
Yeah.
Hasn't been murdered.
That's right.
And this is an ancient Batman. So like if it's following the comics,
right,
he should be gone before Tim Drake shows up. Whatever, they're doing something different. But Tim Drake's story, he's my favorite Robin because he's the self-made Robin. He figures out Batman's identity. He does the detective work to figure out who Batman is. But this takes place years after Jason's death, after Batman has promised himself never again.
Right.
So that's the dynamic that I'm familiar with. I haven't seen the second season, so I'm just interested. Was Tim ever referenced at all in the show, or is this going to be? Is this a new Robin or a Robin that existed that is just new to the show?
No, so Tim has not been mentioned. So in terms of timeline, obviously the first season has Dick transitioning from Robin to Nightwing, right? That's like the first season. Second season is Nightwing and such Dick understanding his relationship to Batman is now different with a new Robin, in his place.
Sure. Yeah.
So now we have Jason, who is disillusioned with Batman, and Batman's brought on another new Robin, presumably here. It's interesting to see if there's a time jump between these seasons because, again, he's played by an ancient man. It's so crazy that they cast him as Batman. But anyway, Jorah Mormont is Batman. Insane. So
Ian Glenn.
You're right. But yeah, it seems like they're taking an accelerated kind of version of this story where, like, hey, we're just gonna bring these Robins all in. Who knows if they get all the way to to Damian? Who knows? But they're clearly at least. And here's the thing: Tim, I think, is underrated as a Batman. You're right because he's like has such an interesting origin story. But when you talk about like interesting Robin stories, like it begins and ends there, kind of.
Well, he gets lost in the shuffle, right? Yeah. Because Jason's murdered, and that's a huge plot point for Batman, right? Obviously Dick's the first one, and then Damian's his son. So Tim just gets lost in the shuffle. Right. But I find I like his character.
I think he takes on more of like a kind of like an Overwatch type of role. I feel like later on in the series,
he's like the only one who takes it seriously. He's like the one who does his job. He just does it right.
He's like, hey, I'm just out here solving crimes, beating up bad guys, and meanwhile you've got Dick just crying about stuff.
All over the place.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one might argue that bringing on teenagers to fight crime is a bad idea anyway.
Who knows, man? There's no way to know the right answer to that.
Yeah. Speaking of Robin, there was Jeremy. I feel like there was news about Zack Snyder talking about Robin in the Justice League or his idea of the DCEU at some point. Is that true? Am I misremembering this?
Yeah, I mean, I think with the Joker's inclusion, since in Batman vs Superman, Bruce still has Robin's costume in the back of there, but it's adorned with the spray paint of "Joke's on You."
Right.
So there might be some sort of reference to how the Joker may have killed him or something to that effect.
I think our understanding is, or we were told at some point that Joker, or so that Robin costume is Dick Grayson's costume.
I think so. Yes.
Yeah. Right. So they kind of changed up the story there too. Anyway, who knows? Generally fan of just more Robin stuff. When Batman, Robin is such an interesting character. Bring him into more Batman stuff. That's what I'm saying. Okay. That is it for the news. I wanted to just quickly mention or talk about WandaVision. So again, spoilers for WandaVision. We can't talk about the show without it. We'll kind of catch up on it. What's happening? Basic spoiler stuff. But again, we can't talk about those spoilers. So if you don't want to be spoiled, skip ahead to the end. I guess you don't skip to the end. You can just end it.
That's the end.
See you next week. Well, see you later. And if you don't mind, or if you are all caught up, stay tuned. We're going to talk about WandaVision starting right now. Okay, so the last episode was I think it's called something spectacular.
Halloween
Spectacular. Love the titles. I've been really enjoying the titles of these series. I think the last time we talked about this on the show, the big reveals hadn't quite happened yet. Since our last conversation, they've brought on. It's actually insane to think about what's happened when you really think about it. So they bring in the actor who played Quicksilver in the X-Men movies to play Pietro here. Like Aaron Taylor Johnson's not playing Pietro. It's freaking what's his name?
I don't remember.
Jeremy, help me out here. The actor playing Pietro. Anyway, Evan Peters. Thank you. It is crazy. First of all, that in and of itself opens up a lot of questions. Those are still unanswered. In fact, more are now. There's bigger questions.
And in
now.
fact, they're asking those questions within the show,
Right.
and we're not receiving those answers yet. So.
And I think so. That's the biggest one. Also, Vision kind of realizing the kind of nature of his reality. I think is another major reveal at the end of this week's episode. So I'll just toss to you guys overall thoughts so far about the show. Are we still on board? Everyone's still enjoying it, and kind of like just give me your thoughts around kind of thoughts, theories about these, specifically the Quicksilver stuff, which I think is the most fascinating. Jeremy, are you still on board?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't think that he was going to play. Honestly, I don't know what I was thinking. I just didn't think he'd come back. I just thought it was going to be like, oh, she answered the door. It's his brother, her brother. I just wasn't expecting him to play that uncle, the 90s, whatever
Right.
uncle role, which was cool. It really gives us our first kind of take on the multiverse, even though we don't know exactly what's going on. Again, Marvel kind of beats DC to the punch here, and they're even utilizing their Flash, which is really crazy.
Yeah.
Even though Doctor Strange will come out before the Flash movie, which would introduce the multiverse for Marvel, it's just crazy that they just said, okay, we're going to use our Flash right now and just go all in and bring in a different Quicksilver. So that's just super, super interesting.
I think you consider the Flash element here because Flash has always had the ability to kind of like be multidimensional. There's multiple Flashes. There's like their whole world with the Speed Force is like confusing, I think, for a lot of people, and like
Definitely.
and is ultimately kind of limitless in its power. Flash can kind of almost do anything, and it was just, by the way, an issue with some of DC stuff is that some of these characters are so powerful that it's really hard to tell stories on film. But we have Quicksilver, who doesn't have those types of abilities. He's just fast. That's his whole thing, right? And yet they're still managing to use him in a way that is like very Flash-esque. Having a different version of quote unquote Flash here is such a. It feels like a very Flash story. That's a great point. I didn't even consider that. And yeah, sorry, continue, Jeremy. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's definitely very cool seeing Evan Peters and Elizabeth Olsen kind of share the screen, being almost kind of like step siblings,
right?
With different histories, but something still feels right there. But also at the same time, which they both acknowledge something's definitely off. So that's the super intriguing part there is how she kind of explains she doesn't really know what's going on still, right? Like they have that moment there where
what happened to your accent?
Yeah.
What happened to your accent? She said, well, he's like, what happened to yours? And then like it's really interesting the way all of his dialogue in this episode is, I think, it just opens up so many questions. Like he's asking questions like, or he said stuff like, I don't remember that because they do a cut, like a jump cut to them as kids, right? And she's like, I don't remember it that way. And she's like, well, you must be repressing the trauma, which is like very on the nose, but I think knowingly so. And then later she talks about how like, hey, I'm just here doing my job. I'm here to give you grief, which is such a very specific word to use there. He says that like he remembers getting shot, and then
she has that glimpse of him as a dead Quicksilver,
right? But in the same way that her
shot.
exactly, but the same version killed in the same way. So
also, I laughed every single time they showed the footage from Age of Ultron where he dies. I just think it's so terribly done, so terribly shot.
I agree.
It's just funny to me. It's absolutely terrible.
What's so crazy to me is that this character is coming back as like a major plot point, right? It's basically like a sequel to a movie that came out like how long ago did Age of Ultron come out? Like 5 years ago?
2010 or something.
Yeah.
Like 10 years ago? Like it's crazy to me that this is such an important.
Like 2013 maybe.
Yeah, 2012.
This is something we can look up. Anyways,
I also want to say it's crazy though, with that point in mind is that I don't necessarily think that we have any sort of like idea of their relationship and how close they are together. Right. You know what I mean? Because we've just seen the one movie where they're kind of tricked, and they're kind of the bad guys in the beginning there. But it's so odd that we're revisiting these two characters, but one of them is plucked from a different speak. And then it's okay. So it's like if we're leading to the place where we get Aaron Taylor Johnson's Quicksilver, will it feel earned or appropriate or any of that? Like, will it feel at home? Will it feel normal? Like, there he is. You know what I mean? Like,
So
I don't think I'm ever going to get that.
I don't think that's going to come
based on what's happened before.
I don't think that's going to come. I don't think we're going to get the Aaron Taylor. I don't think Quicksilver comes out of the show alive and is just like another part of the universe again. I don't anticipate that. I could be wrong. Of course, anything's possible in comic books, but I don't think that's what you do. And I think that if you end however the show ends, and if Vision and Quicksilver are both still quote unquote dead, because they're the two that are obviously dead characters, right? That are somehow here. If they're both end, this inclusion of not Aaron Taylor Johnson, but why can't I remember his name? Evan Peters is just becomes like a nod to the multiverse without it being like opening the door all the way, right? You don't have to explain it.
But the door will be open all the way.
Right, later.
At some point.
Right.
So when it opens, what comes out? Clearly dead people or someone.
It's obviously dead people. I mean,
why wouldn't it be? Like that's so comic book. But then also you look with Vision. I mean, obviously very interesting part of the show. Again, getting closer and closer to figure out what's going on. But they see him alive outside of the barrier, even though there's a defense mechanism that would kill him if he was to fully escape. I guess he can't really fully escape without
dying.
Wanda's permission.
Well, there's so many things. Like he has no recollection of his life before East Westview, right? He doesn't know what an Avenger is
because okay. So here's my take.
Obviously,
Vision and Quicksilver are manifestations,
right?
Whereas the other people aren't.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's the major difference. Wanda's clearly losing control and doesn't have or never had full control because she's being surprised by things as well. She's not entirely sure what's going on. But what was surprising to me is how deliberate she is about what she's doing to these people. She is cognizant of everything that she's doing. Yeah. Including the torture that these people are going through.
And there's really creepy shots in this episode of that single tear going down that lady's face. Like that is, and never mind what the episode previous when Vision's friend is like, "We are in pain. You need to." Like that is a pretty dark fucking thing to bring into a show that's riffing on sitcoms. And by the way, they're riffing on Malcolm in the Middle here, I think primarily. And Malcolm in the Middle, interestingly, didn't premiere until 2001. So they kind of skipped the 90s a little bit, although Malcolm in the Middle definitely has that aesthetic. So
it's a 90s show.
But it's not, though.
It's a show set in the 90s.
I don't think it is. I mean, it doesn't matter. I mean, it doesn't ultimately matter because it's all made up. But it's fascinating. I think, and again, the interesting thing for me with the Quicksilver thing is that there's this whole kind of multiverse side that you mentioned, Jeremy, and the possibilities are kind of endless here. Does this imply that when they do introduce the X-Men, it's going to be the Fox X-Men? I don't think so. Nor do I want that to be. It certainly could imply.
But we have one already. Conclusion.
Right. Exactly.
This tells us that is part of the multiverse that exists.
Sure.
So at some point, this is going to lead to the new MCU X-Men existing. What does that look like? When does that come in?
They've got to be.
Is there going to
be characters?
We did talk that when we were playing games there. Yeah. What if there is a mix of new and old?
You could.
Well, it probably will be, but I would say that.
So for my prediction for that, I was saying that I think Michael Fassbender's Magneto would be a perfect extrapolation from the X-Men, the old X-Men movies, to move on forward with.
Isn't Michael Fassbender like the same age as like Pietro? And like I feel like that's never been an issue, obviously, with those characters, but like it's something that the MCU certainly takes more seriously. It kind of characters' ages, like you can't have the father can't.
Well, he's definitely distinguishably older than those two, but with this crazy multiverse stuff happening, it's kind of an easy way to get a casting, but also not have like another Patrick Stewart, situation where they're super old. You know, like that's like, or who was the original Magneto? I'm forgetting his blank. Or Ian
McKellen. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like that's not very exciting to like get that type of that same age.
Right. Like here's a 95-year-old Magneto.
Right.
Like, that's
like
not. I agree.
if I'm rebooting X-Men in the MCU, like I want Professor X and Magneto in their 40s,
For a long time.
50s.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
I think we're getting ahead of ourselves here. I don't know that this is an example of the multiverse. Evan Peters being in the show.
You think it's just like a nod as a fan casting?
Because it's not Quicksilver from the X-Men movies. It's the Quicksilver from the Avengers movies. That's the person talking. The person we see, the actor's different, but the character is the one from the Avengers movies, not the X-Men movies.
Well, I mean, I don't think that's clear. I don't know if that's. I don't think that's clear.
The one that got shot.
Right, yeah, I know. Sure, but I don't think. But I think there's a deliberate choice to cast.
Yeah,
this actor.
No, I'm not saying that wasn't deliberate. I'm saying we don't necessarily have any evidence for the multiverse here because it's not pulling that guy from a
No, I don't think so. I don't think that's fair either because it's clear in the show that she is also confused by the fact that he looks different and is like, right?
Yeah, I agree
so
with all
like
that.
if it's just a manifestation, quote unquote, of her imagination, she wouldn't just pull some random person in. Like if you know what I mean, they would bring Aaron Taylor Johnson back for that. I think.
Not necessarily, because the point is that she's losing control of her internal reality.
She was also surprised by the fact that he even arrived at all.
Right.
So it's like
that's part of her losing control.
But then, did you also say that Vision is a manifestation too?
Yes. Yeah.
So why did
it's a manifestation that turned into reality when he was outside of the bubble?
He was dying. So I would assume that
he was alive on the outside. But he's alive on the outside of it. People can see him and talk to him. He can talk to them.
Yeah, but he couldn't stay alive on the outside, right? He started dying as soon as he left the internal.
But he still exists on the outside. So how can they see him? Like,
because she controls reality. She can like recreate him. I guess is what's happening.
What I was saying is that she has his physical body. That's what you could see outside is his physical body. But bringing him to life, that's when she's using her reality altering powers,
right.
And those powers are only functional within that bubble. For these capacities at least, for Vision and for the town. And then she's expanding the powers at the end of this episode. Clearly, she's going to lose control to a larger extent because she's expanding.
Well, I think she expands this, which is fascinating. I really want to see. Like, I was so upset that they didn't give us any hint in terms of like what Kate Dennings' character is like inside the bubble and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. I guess that obviously they're saving it, but like just a little hint would have been nice. Anyway, I think there's clearly someone else pulling the strings here as well. There is a shadow figure that that is either been here the whole time, in either her neighbor or someone else pulling the strings. I know Mephisto's been brought up as a possibility for a while. I don't know how that stuff plays in. I think the show is more interesting when it's Wanda making conscious decisions about what she's doing and being aware of it and losing control in that sense and from an emotional standpoint. I'm less interested if they kind of pull the rug from under. It's like, oh, it's been someone else the whole time. I don't know if that's going to happen necessarily, but I also don't think I'm on the board with you in the sense that this version of Quicksilver isn't the X-Men version. I think it is the X-Men.
But he doesn't have memories from that universe.
But neither does.
That could be a byproduct of whatever is in the mixture that we're unaware of. I mean, right. You also get Spider-Man 3 filming. Like we're getting Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield. Like it's happening. They're gonna start.
I'm not saying the multiverse isn't gonna be a thing. I'm just saying it's too like it doesn't have any relation to the show at this point. There's no reason to assume that it does.
So what you're saying, I'm trying to understand here. So what you're saying is that the person that is playing Pietro in the world of the show is just some random dude that she's pulled in to play that role.
What I'm thinking is happening here, because the entire reality of the show is projections from her altering reality, right? Mm-hmm. So that is a manifestation of her brother. She's trying to bring her brother back, probably subconsciously or unconsciously, right? So she's creating this manifestation. She didn't get the image right because her head she's not all there.
I suppose.
So it makes more sense to me because of how he was referencing events from the Marvel universe and not from the X-Men universe.
Right.
Just because it's the actor, to me, does not indicate that he's from another universe.
I think for me, that is such a strong indicator that because if they were doing what you were doing, I think think you would not have cast such an obvious. You wouldn't have done this casting. You would have done something less obvious. Someone that looks like Aaron Taylor Johnson, close, similar to them, right? Instead of this obvious representation of the person of the character from the X-Men movies. I think it's like, because I mean, maybe it's still possible. You're right. It's still possible to just like, this is a fun casting choice because he already played the
That's
character.
not what I'm saying either. I'm just like, it's.
Well, you just said there's no indication that it's multiverse related.
Yes.
So yeah, if it's that, then and he's not the Pietro from the X-Men universe, then it is just a fun casting choice, and not doesn't necessarily mean anything else, because that has meaning to people watching it.
Yeah, no, I don't think that this specifically may end up having larger ramifications for the MCU. Obviously, the multiverse is going to be a thing that's already on the table, and I'm sure that Evan Peters will come back as Quicksilver, but it won't be because of this.
Do you think Evan Peters is going to be brought in as
Aaron Taylor Johnson?
Which one do you
mean
think?
Evan Peters or Aaron Taylor Johnson?
Evan Peters.
Interesting. I don't think you bring Evan Peters back into the as Quicksilver unless you intend on connecting those universes.
I'm making assumptions here. Of course, we all are speculating, but I'm assuming, and I agree with you, that this Quicksilver is not going to finish. He's not going to get out of the WandaVision alive. He's not coming back to life. And I think that's because he's not from another universe, but because he's in her head or created by her reality altering
He certainly has a lot of, like, the way his dialogue, again, is super interesting because he seems to be much more aware than a lot of the characters are, right? He talks about...
No, he's only aware insofar as Wanda is.
Right.
He has her thoughts. That's it. He's only ever reflecting her thoughts.
Yeah. It's again, obviously fascinating. And the fact that we can have this conversation around a Marvel show is, I think, good. I will be shocked if we're having similar conversations around Falcon and Winter Soldier. We'll be having conversations like, how cool is that fight scene? Or, I really love this, interaction between Bucky and like, who knows? But I don't think that we're going to be having these types of, like, much larger conversations around the nature of reality in the MCU in that show. And I think that's what's so fun about this. So, okay, just predictions for how the show ends. Are we still on board with this show introducing, bringing in mutants into the MCU? Because I still think we're going to get a reversed House of M moment at the end of this show. I don't know, but what do you guys think? Jeremy?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, but it all ties into with multiverse in mind and X-Men and where she's going next, because we know she's going to be, so, and also, like, the madness word about that, right? Like, it just seems like it's going to be so just crazy.
It's going to be crazy. It's going to be crazy. And, like, you could do a lot of really crazy things. You could do
it's already confusing now. Like,
yeah.
So I can only imagine how confusing it's going to get towards that point. And also, we had that one character who's going to be in touch with some sort of scientist.
Oh yeah,
people are leading to believe that it could be Reed Richards.
I don't think. Okay, so I think it would be cool if it was Reed Richards, but I don't think it is because we know that movie's coming, and they have not done casting for that movie yet. So if they did the secret casting, you know what? Props. That's really awesome. And they cast like a major, like, I don't think you get like a random to play Reed Richards. Let's put it that way. Like, there's going to be someone you're familiar with. He's going to have a pedigree of some kind. If that actor walks in on set, and by the way, we still have the fact that this idea that there's a cameo coming that's just as big as Luke from Mandalorian. And I don't know if we already saw it in Evan Peters, or if it's still coming, and maybe it's like, hey, we're dropping Reed Richards here. I would be shocked because, again, the casting's not been announced yet, and that movie's not it's still a couple years out. There's other options. I know that people speculated that it could be Ironheart. It doesn't make sense because they've said he a couple times. They've already cast her for that show on Disney Plus, so that was a possibility. But my actual thinking is that it's Rhodey. I don't. Is he an engineer? He's not an engineer. He's a military guy, I guess. Eh? I don't know. I don't know. So Jeremy, how much? If you were going to put money on it, how likely do you think it is that it's Reed Richards in that role?
Oh, I wouldn't put any money on it. I just think it would be super cool, like you said. I'd also be shocked.
Which would be cool in and of itself. It just we're so shocked so rarely these days, and which is why this Evan Peters thing is.
She says an aerospace engineer.
Yeah.
So
I know people have done like a lot of guessing on this, like who are aerospace engineers in the MCU in Marvel. There's a bazillion. You know what I mean? Like it could be anyone, and the fact that they kind of hinted at it without saying a name now twice means to me that it is someone we know. It's a name that from the comics that we probably know, that we may or may not have already seen in the MCU. Who knows at this point?
I think Reed Richards makes perfect sense. We said earlier that they're really focusing on TV now, so we can expect some of these big reveals to be featured in TV shows as opposed to movies now.
I mean, it's the big, and I was going to mention this, I forgot, but currently the most popular TV show in the world right now, WandaVision. It's the show right now, which is not surprising. And I think a lot of people have come around to its pacing, which is good to see. I know that a lot of people were turned off in the early episodes. So what do you think? How do you think this ends up? Where does this go?
I'm basing it mostly off of House of M.
Right.
The beginning of House of M, in my mind, House of M is kind of like the multiverse of madness.
Right.
Deciding what to do with Wanda. That's what House of M is about. So I feel like in the series, she's going to continue losing control and continue, like, probably, ramp up and escalate in terms of the abuse of the people around her. So she's going to turn into a bit of a villain throughout the show, and Vision's going to have to be the hero, maybe sacrificing himself in some sense to put an end to this all. And then Doctor Strange is going to have to figure out what to do with Wanda.
Do you think Doctor Strange makes an appearance in the show?
No, not in the show, no, but that's what the movie, that's what leads into the movie.
Well, we know that
I could see it. I could see at the end 100%.
Yeah.
But it's also crazy though, because this show was supposed to
come second.
Was supposed to be last.
Yeah.
I think so.
Well, I mean, it was supposed to come out after Falcon and Winter Soldier.
Yeah. But then they changed it up and they said, okay, it's the first one to go. So that's interesting.
I just love that it's the first one, because it's like this. It's really tackling the medium of television, and it's like we're doing Marvel and TV, and it just feels like it fits. And then stuff like Falcon and Winter Soldier feels like an extended movie, and that's fine. But it just I just like this, like, serendipity there, that it's like, hey, we got to move this around, and it just happened that WandaVision came out first, and it kind of just fits. I think you're right, though.
The whole ramp up towards the end of this episode was just amazing. I mean, we basically see Vision die again. If you didn't know that,
third time,
and just suck him back in, and he'd be turned fine. And then the Evan Peters Quicksilver even makes a joke about it, which I laughed at.
Right.
Even though it's super serious.
Yeah. You can't die twice.
Just what a dramatic scene that was. Like, it's unbelievable, really.
I love that the military folks become clowns. It's kind of like its own meta commentary. There's so many questions we haven't even touched on. What do you guys make of the commercial? This one is like all the stuff is previously. The commercials have been kind of traumatic moments in her life. Which traumatic moment is this referencing? Her getting her powers for the first time, but it also, the character dies in the commercial. It's pretty fucking dark, right?
The kid dies trying to open up a yogurt tube.
Right.
Of magic powers.
Your magic. Yeah. Right. So I'm wondering, was she that's I think where people start getting speculating about Mephisto again. It's like, was she given a kind of a deal with the devil situation where, like, hey, I'll let you create this world, but it comes at a price. We don't even know necessarily what that price is yet. Maybe her own sanity. I don't know. But that the commercial was really fascinating. Also very funny, like a stop motion cartoon from felt very 90s. What do you guys think of the kids? Like, do the kids come out of this alive? Like,
no, because they're created within this false reality or alternate reality. I guess it's not false, but they
aren't these characters real characters in the comics?
Yeah, they have very confusing backstories.
They were also created by her imagination in the comics. They were
also in the Young Avengers team.
Yes, they are. Wiccan and Speed.
They're clearly going to have a Young Avengers movie at some point as well.
Absolutely.
It's like, why build these characters up? They're also amazing young actors. I mean, they're probably
I don't know.
They're probably 10. They're like 10, they're like 10 or 9.
I wouldn't say they're amazing. I think they're serviceable child actors. I haven't seen anything that they're
I
doing
would give
something
them. I would give them way more. I would give them way more credit than that.
they've barely been on.
Especially the Quicksilver one. The Quicksilver one. He's really good. Like, pay attention to him.
I don't like. I kind of just kind of say I'm not a big fan of the speed look, the effect that they use in the MCU. This kind of like blurred line thing is kind of cheesy and lame. I don't like it. It's not my favorite, but I mean whatever. Anything else you guys want to mention about WandaVision before we wrap up?
That's it for me.
No. Okay. Well, then we will wrap it up there, and we'll be back probably the next 2 weeks ish. We've got a movie club pending sometime in the next couple weeks as well, so stay tuned for that. Patreon.com/TowerBabblecast is where you can find those, and follow us on Twitter. Now that our Twitter's back, loving being back on Twitter. I'm gonna be honest, guys, it was real painful. Twitter.com/TowerBabblecast and Facebook.com/TowerBabblecast is where you're gonna find that as well. If you have any thoughts, comments about the show, TowerBabblePodcast@gmail.com is the way to reach us. I mean, really, any way you can get a hold of me, I'll see it. But we love the emails. So let us know, and we'll be back, like I said, in a couple weeks